We are ready to get started. And we are wrapping up Unit 15. I only got a few more things to say, and then we're going to pick up our calculators and do the rest of our financing math. But before we do that, we have a few other things left to say. And where we left each other in Unit 15, we were talking about some lender laws. So we were talking about, for example, fair credit opportunity. We were talking about Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which gave the lenders their protected classes. We were also talking about, I turned caption on so far. Can you guys see that caption? Does that drive you nuts? You can? Yeah. All right, bear with me. Hang on. Somehow I turned that on. Just a second, because that's going to drive me a little nuts. Anybody know how to turn caption off? Turn caption off. Ah. I don't know. We may have to live with caption today. I don't know. My computer updated this morning. That's the fun thing about updates. We don't always know what they're going to update.
So under your accessibility tabs, like where you do your volume and things, it should say live captions.
Accessibility in Zoom?
No, on your actual computer.
On my actual computer.
Yeah.
Accessibility.
It's where you can do like your.
Let's see. And then caption. It says it's off.
Well, I'm not seeing it anymore.
Okay, let's try this again. Well, they say, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, you know? Let's see what happens. Subsea, above slide, below slide, overlay. Turn caption off. All right, we don't have time, captions it is. So something new in the pre-licensing day. Sorry, you guys. I'll do my homework this weekend and try to get it off for next week. I have no idea, but we can't spend our time y'all watching me trying to figure this out. So captions are on for today. So lender laws, equal credit opportunity gives us the lenders, protected classes, fair credit reporting. We talked about your credit history, your credit score, just various things that the lenders need to follow. Another thing that may come up in the lending practice is loan fraud. Loan fraud is really bad. Let's just say that. Loan fraud is bad. If you're committing loan fraud, you're providing false information in the hopes to obtain a loan, in the hopes to get money. Remember the other day we were talking about borrowing from a private source, for example, the bank of mom and dad. And if mom and dad sign, maybe mom and dad say, well, they're not going to borrow it. We're going to gift it. They don't have to pay us back. So if mom and dad sign that, this is a gift, you don't have to pay it back. And then come to find out mom and dad lied, mom and dad just committed loan fraud. So lenders are on alert for this. You can see there's some serious consequences to committing loan fraud. You and I, as the brokers, the agents to these buyers, we need to just pay attention, be on alert for things. And if something sounds funny, if your little red flag goes up when you're talking to your buyers, just alert the lender for them to investigate, for them to look into it. The lenders also have something called the North Carolina Predatory Lending Act. These just put restrictions and limitations on various loans. If there's any fees charged, the lender may be required to credit them back or reverse them. We're going to try to prevent unfair or deceptive trade practices, and we're going to help educate the consumer. Remember, a lot of the lender laws that we have today are in place. Their main purpose is to protect the consumer. When somebody is getting a new loan, when somebody is looking for the terms of a loan, today it's about consumer protection. So the Predatory Lending Act just gives us some ideas of things that we can do to protect the lender. The consumer, the borrower. The last thing before we get in the math, we introduced you to TRID and TILA and RESPA and all that good stuff. So we're just going to throw this out about RESPA here. We said TILA tells the consumer the cost to obtain the loan. When you see TILA, it's the Truth in Lending Act. So when you see TILA, see the word lending. When you see RESPA, the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, see the word settlement. So TILA tells the consumer the cost to the cost to obtain the loan. TILA tells the consumer the cost to obtain the loan. RESPA tells the consumer the cost to close. We're going to talk a little bit more about RESPA when we get into it in Unit 21. So that gets us through the verbiage in Units 14 and 15 with a little bit of math. The key, again, I think the key to the financing units, to Units 14 and 15, are the words, the vocabulary. And when we see financing, I really do think it helps to see through the eyes of the lender, because the lender's the one issuing the loan, explaining the loan terms. And again, keeping in mind, we're not in lender school. We're not here to get mortgage licenses. So we're just introducing you to and scratching surfaces so we have this basic understanding. Let's see. Somebody was trying to get you to buy a house. She said you need $3,000. We would just say it was a gift. You were like 19 years old. Is that loan fraud? I don't know. Did they lie to you about it? I don't know. You may want to investigate that. I can't answer that question for you. But could it be? I guess it's possible. So you may want to look into that further. Another thing that came up the other day, I was thinking about it after class, and we were talking about with the Lenders Equal Credit Opportunity Act. and that age is a protected class with the lenders. And that age implies that the applicant is at least 18 years old. So the age that we're protecting for the Equal Credit Opportunity Act is the elderly. So the example we gave was the 90-year-old that's applying for a 30-year-old loan, for a 30-year loan. There's a really good chance that 90-year-old won't be around to pay off that 30-year loan. However, because of their age, they can't be denied the loan. So then the question came in, what happens when that 90-year-old dies? Guys, remember, our mortgage loans are specific liens. Specific liens attached to what? The property. So if any homeowner passes away, it'll go to the estate. If they don't have an estate, then the state will find heirs. So that gets us back to our intestate succession, escheat, or the heirs can sell the property and pay off the debt if there is a will. So the various ways that we can transfer. And I think that's a good question. I think that's a good point to make, because I mean, really for the lender, any of us getting a 30-year loan is risky, isn't it? Is it the 90-year-old? Is it the 18-year-old? I mean, none of us have guarantees for 30 more years, right? So the lender always has that possibility. What if, what if, what if? And again, how they protect themselves is by recording the mortgage. So when the individual dies, the debt doesn't go away. It'll be taken care of when the property is sold or inherited or whatever. Okay, we got two pieces of math to finish up Unit 15. So the first piece of math, we're going to talk about something called the mortgage factor chart. Before we talk about the mortgage factor chart, we got to get a formula. I have yet to figure out how to use the T-bar with this, which means we just have to memorize the formula. This is one of these formulas that you need to know. I highly recommend you put this formula on a flashcard so you can memorize it. Ask yourself over and over and over again. Guys, knowing the formulas is like 80% of the battle with these math problems. If you don't know the formula, you don't know what to do with the numbers. Those of you that have been doing the math practice up to this point, have you guys learned, have you guys seen, especially with the math, they like to give you a lot of distractors, don't they? They like to give you a lot of numbers that don't apply to this problem. What's a distractor's job? It has one purpose: to distract you. So are you letting the distractor do a good job? One way you can beat the distractor, the only way I know to beat the distractor, is to know the formula. Because if the problem's asking you, for example, to find the monthly principal and interest, the monthly debt service, all you need to know is the loan amount, the rate factor, and the 1,000. You don't need to know all those other numbers to find the monthly principal and interest. So again, knowing the formula is like 80% of the battle. Turn with me to your book, if you will, in pages 412 and 413. Page 412 and 413, what we're looking at is your mortgage factor chart, also known as your rate factor chart. You do not have to memorize this. That's a common question I get. Do I have to memorize? No, you don't have to memorize this, but we have to know how it works. We have to understand what it's about. So the couple things that the mortgage factor chart's looking at, the first column that you see the rate, that's your interest rate. The other columns are the terms of the loan. Is it a 10-year loan, a 15-year loan, a 20-year loan, a 25-year loan, or a 30-year loan? Knowing the interest rate and the term of the loan helps the lender find the rate factor. The rate factor is used to help the lender calculate the monthly debt service. So once the lender knows your projected interest rate, once they know the term of your loan, then they can figure out how much is your monthly debt service. How much is your monthly principal and interest? Let's say you are getting you're looking at a 6.5 interest rate, a loan with a 6.5% interest rate, and you're looking for a term of 30 years. 6.5% interest rate and a term of 30 years. You guys tell me in a private chat, what would your rate factor be? 6.5 interest rate for 30 years. And tell me in a private chat what your rate factor would be. Everybody in? 6.5% interest rate for 30 years. So the lender wants to know, what's my rate factor? So first thing you want to do, take your pointer finger and go to the interest rate column and slide down until you get to 6.5%. Once you see 6.5%, then you slide the whole way over to 30 years and you get a rate factor of 6.32. If the problem doesn't give you the rate factor, it will give you the interest rate in the term. For my test, it will give you the rate factor because I can't provide you the chart on my exam. I have heard students go to PSI Testing Center and this chart is blown up real big on the wall. So you may see a test question that gives you the interest rate, gives you the term, and you have to find the rate factor. Again, you don't have to memorize this thing, but you may need to know how to work it. So is everybody good with interest rate and finding the term of the loan so we can find the rate factor? Do I have any questions on that?
So the difference between the interest rate and the rate factor is just the fact that one actually affects the amount, or I guess they both affect. I'm just a little confused on what the difference is.
The interest rate, the interest is what you pay the lender for borrowing the principal, and they charge you an interest rate to borrow the money. The rate factor looks at your interest rate and the term of your loan, and to help us identify the monthly principal and interest. Remember, your monthly debt service stays the same every single month. That payment is the same for the life of the loan. That covers your principal and interest. The only thing that changes is how much you apply to principal and how much you apply to interest each month.
Right.
So to help them figure out what your monthly debt service is going to be, they look at the interest rate, but they also look at the term to find that rate factor to use that with your loan amount.
Okay, thank you.
It's a tool for the lenders to help us determine how much your monthly payment's going to be. They probably aren't going to give you the 1,000 on your test. They'll give you the loan amount. If they don't give you the rate factor, they'll tell you how you can find it, but they're not going to give you the 1,000. So again, this takes us back to having this formula memorized. It's the only way I know to get this problem right is if we have this formula memorized. Also, did you guys hear what I just said? I just gave you guys a bunch of information, didn't I? I said, when you see this problem on my test, and when you see this on your state exam. Are you guys going to see this on your test? Are you going to see this again? Yeah, memorize the formula. I'm telling you, you're going to see this again. Everybody good? Do we have this written down? We're going to do a practice problem together.
So, I'm sorry, you gave us all this information and we didn't have to calculate anything and you only wanted us to look on this piece of paper, and that's why I was so confused.
What's that? What piece of paper?
I thought we were supposed to be calculating something, and
Well, I'm getting ready to flip the slide like right now. I'm sorry. I was
Okay.
still talking about this. So
So I was like, what am I supposed to be calculating here?
Okay,
And
all
the
right,
whole
here you
time
go.
we were supposed to
In
be
a
looking.
private chat, tell me what the Millers, I'm so sorry. There you go. About 30 more seconds and then we'll talk about it. Okay. So what do we do first when we see a math problem or any problem for that matter? What do we do first? Just read, breathe and read. So the Millers are borrowing 350,000 at 4.5% annual interest for 30 years. Using the mortgage factor chart, it is determined that the mortgage factor is 5.07. What will the Millers' monthly debt service be for the loan? So the first thing, if I were taking this test, the first thing I would do after I read that problem is I would say what I'm finding is my monthly debt service. So my formula tells me I'm taking the loan amount times the mortgage factor or the rate factor. And then we're going to divide by 1,000. So we have the formula, so we know what numbers that we need to use. So now let's start filling in the gaps. I know the loan amount is 350,000. I know the rate factor or the mortgage factor is 5.07. So on our calculators, if we take 350,000 times 5.07, I get a really big number. 1,774,500. And then the last step in my formula tells me to take that and divide it by 1,000. And that gives you your monthly debt service, your monthly principal and interest for this loan, $1,774.50. Questions? Keep in mind, guys, this is just principal and interest. This is just your debt service. This doesn't include your escrow taxes and your escrow insurance. This is just what you owe the bank. So this is not your monthly payment. This is a piece of your monthly payment. Somebody says 4.5% is a distractor. Yes. That's your distractor. That's your distractor. Now, if they didn't give you the mortgage factor, you'd be looking at a big chart. You'd be using the 4.5% in the 30 years, right? Because you have to look it up like we just did on pages 412 and 413. Questions?
So this is only used for whenever it's the full amortized loan, not partially amortized loans. Does it
It
change?
could be full or partially amortized because you're still paying the same amount every month. You're still paying that same monthly payment every month. The
Mhm.
difference in a fully amortized loan and a partially amortized loan, the fully amortized loan, when you make that last payment, your balance due is 0. On a
Right.
partially amortized loan, when you make that last payment, you have a balance due.
Yeah.
And that
Okay.
balance due is your balloon payment. You're still paying the same every month. You're just not paying it off in a partially. And that's what amortized means. Regular level payments.
Got it.
Anything else on this? The other piece of math in Unit 15 we need to go through, unfortunately, you're not going to find in your book. And I'll tell you why. Once upon a time ago, it was in the book. And then somehow it came out that you were no longer tested on this next piece of math. So they took it out of your book. But then they came back and said, no. You're going to see a test question on this. So it's in the test, but it's not made it back to the book yet. Rest assured, we're recording. You may want to make a note that this conversation starts about 9:30. So we're recording. You can go back. I do have practice for you guys. I have resources for you guys, but I'm trying to save you some time right now to let you know this math is not in your book. It's in the online learning system. So the rest of the math of Unit 15 is about qualifying a buyer. And then specifically, we're going to look at our qualifying ratios for our conventional loan. And we're going to use the 28-36% qualifying ratios. So the first part in understanding this math is we need to understand what those ratios mean. So let's talk about our 28 and 36% ratios. The 28% ratio looks at housing expenses. Housing expenses are defined as your principal and interest, taxes and insurance payment, your monthly payment for your debt service, your taxes, and your insurance. Housing expenses are also your HOA dues, if applicable, and your private mortgage insurance, if applicable. Remember, this is a conventional loan. If your conventional loan is 80% or more, the loan to value ratio is 80% or more, the lender will probably charge PMI insurance. So the first ratio, the 28%, looks at the housing expenses. What does that mean? Let's talk about pie. Let's pretend this entire pie represents your monthly income. How much income do you have coming in your household, or those that are applying for the loan? We're looking at all of your monthly income. And what they say is of your entire monthly income, 28% can be allowed for housing expenses. So in determining how a buyer qualifies, they have to look at your debt to income ratio. And based on your projected PITI payment, projected HOA dues, and projected PMI, if the housing expenses are more than 28% of your monthly income, you won't get loan approval. The second ratio is the 36%, and it looks at your housing expenses and your reoccurring debt. So what do we just define as housing expenses? PITI, HOA dues, and PMI, plus any of your reoccurring debt. What are the bills that you sit down and pay every month? Credit cards, medical, child support, alimony, student loans. What are the bills you sit down and pay every month? That is your reoccurring debt. So the second ratio, again, looks at pie. And if we think of the entire pie as your monthly income, how much do you have coming in? They will allow for total housing expenses and reoccurring debt to be no more than 36% of your monthly income. If your housing expenses and reoccurring debt are more than 36% of your monthly income, you're not going to get loan approval. In order to qualify for a loan, a borrower has to qualify under both the 28% and the 36%. So if they run your numbers and your housing expenses is under 28%, but your reoccurring obligations are more than 36%, you're not getting loan approval. In order to qualify, we have to qualify under both. So the 28% looks at housing expenses and part of your monthly income. The 36% looks at your reoccurring obligations as part of your monthly income. Questions so far before we look at our formulas? Formula, I should say.
I'm assuming that if we have a problem on this, they're gonna tell us the different percentages, or do we need to remember for each types of loan what that percentage?
Honestly, Joy, I've heard it both ways. So let's just go ahead and memorize that 2836.
Okay, are we
I've
more,
heard some students say they give it to you. I've had other students say, so I don't know. So let's just be safe and know that conventional loans use a 28-36% ratio. You're not going to get FHA or VA. That much I do know. You'll just get conventional. So let's just go ahead and know that 28-36%. Yep. Questions on this? Okay. So let's look at our T-bar. When I qualify a buyer, I actually got to run the same T-bar twice. Once for the 28% and again for the 36%. So qualifying a buyer requires two T-bars. The good news is they're the same. Monthly expenses is part of your monthly income. Note that word monthly. What if they give you annual income in the problem? We got to convert it to monthly, so we got to divide by 12. There's your distractor. Annual income, we know we got to convert it to monthly. Annual expenses, we know we got to convert it to monthly. So how we do that from annuals, we divide by 12. Any three of these could be a candidate for your exam. They could ask you about the monthly expenses. They could ask you about the monthly income. We know the qualifying ratio. So again, if they give that to you, great, you have it. If not, we've just decided we're going to go ahead and memorize that. If they ask you for the qualifying ratio, what they're asking is, do they qualify under the 28.36%? So you just take their expenses, divide it by their income. Housing expenses are less than 28%, they qualify. Housing expenses are less and reoccurring obligations are less than 36%, then they qualify. So we're going to go through these together, make sure we have good conversations about them. Remember, we are recording, and then I will show you where you can find practice for these in the online learning system. So everybody have our formula written down? Everybody good? So far, questions so far? Okay. So let's look at the three possibles that we may see in our exam. We're going to solve for monthly expenses, we're going to solve for monthly income, and we're going to solve for the qualifying ratio. So first up, we got Jerry and Shannon. Jerry and Shannon are considering purchasing a home. Together, they earn $83,000 per year. Their estimated housing expenses are $1,500 per month. Their monthly recurring debt is $1,100. Would Jerry and Shannon qualify for conventional loan using the 28.36% ratios? So we're asking the question, based on Jerry and Shannon's financial information, do they fall under the 28% and do they fall under the 36%? I know I'm qualifying a buyer, so I can use two qualifying ratios. In both of these, what we're solving for are Jerry and Shannon's qualifying ratios. We're seeing if they fall under the 28 and the 36%. Jerry and Shannon have an annual income of $83,000 per year. I don't want annual though, do I? We're looking for monthly income. So if we take our 83,000 and we divide it by 12, we get monthly income. We get monthly income of $69,116.67. I'm talking about the same borrowers. I'm talking about the same income. So the monthly income is going to be the same for both. This is all about Jerry and Shannon. So we took our annual income, divided it by 12 to get monthly. Questions so far? Now we need to look at their housing expenses and their reoccurring debt. So I know their housing expenses are $1,500 per month. The first one only looks at housing expenses. So housing expenses of $1,500 per month. The back fourth line on the T-bar means divide. So you take 1,500, divide it by $6,916.67. And I get 0.2168 something as a rate on my calculator. When I convert that to a percent, I get 21.68%. You convert a rate to a percent by moving your decimal over two places. So based on the first qualifying ratio, housing expenses only, do Jerry and Shannon qualify? Are we good so far? Yeah, because so far they are under that 28% threshold. So far, their projected housing expenses allow them to fall under that 28% threshold. Questions? The next one looks at their housing expenses. We decided it was 1,500 plus all of their reoccurring obligations. So 1,500 plus 1,100 gives us housing expenses plus reoccurring obligations of 2,600. Income's still the same. So that fourth line on the T-bar tells us to take 2,600 divided by 6916.67. And we get, 0.3759 as a rate. That shakes out to 37, we'll say 0.8%, just round a little bit here. Did they fall under the 36%? No. Do Jerry and Shannon qualify for this loan? No. Because in order to qualify, you got to qualify with both. So what happens? Well, okay, hang on, it's not over yet. Obviously, the easy solution is just make more money. You can increase your income and you increase that bottom line. That's the easy solution, right? That's all you got to do. What's the realistic solution? The realistic solution might be to get some of that reoccurring debt paid down. As that reoccurring debt comes down and as you make more money, that affects that 28 and 36%. They're close. They don't have a lot of work to do. They're close, but clearly what's preventing them from getting the loan is their debt, because that's the one that set them over. Another option might be to find a less expensive home that would have a less expensive housing expense. So maybe Jerry and Shannon are just a little bit out of their realm, and we can lower the purchase price a little bit, their price point a little bit, and get them in. But under these terms right now, as it stands, Jerry and Shannon are not qualifying because they didn't qualify under the 28 and the 36. Questions on solving for the 28-36% ratios? Okay. We good so far? Can I erase the blue? Another problem you may see is asking for their monthly expenses, particularly their maximum housing payment. The maximum housing payment is part of their monthly expenses. There's two different things we need to consider because we're considering two different T-bars, two different formulas. So before we look at our example together, let's talk first about what we're going to do with these numbers, how these T-bars are going to look. To find the maximum payment on our T-bar, we're going to take that monthly income and times it by 28%. To find the maximum payment using the 36% ratio, we're going to take the income and we're going to times it by 36%. And then we're going to deduct, we're going to subtract the reoccurring expenses. By subtracting the reoccurring expenses, it allows the lender to do a side-by-side comparison of maximum housing payment to maximum housing payment. By subtracting the reoccurring expenses from the 36%, the lender is only looking at housing expenses for the 28 and the 36%. They will only qualify under one of the ratios. What is their allowable maximum housing expenses? And when it comes to determining which ratio they will qualify under, I refer to this as opposite world. When the problem asks for the maximum expense, they're gonna approve the loan on the lower of the two numbers. Through the eyes of the lender, which one is less risky? The one that has a higher housing expense or the one that has a lower housing expense? Through the eyes of the lender, the one that's less risky is the lower. So which one will they qualify under? The lower of the two. So when the problem asks you for maximum housing expenses, we're going to run our T-bars twice. And then we're going to look, the one they qualify under will be the lower of the two. So you guys ready to look at one of these together? Anybody have this? Okay. So Brian has an annual income of $35,000 and his wife Margaret has an annual income of $38,000. Recurring obligations are $700 per month. What is the maximum payment they can afford using the 28-36% ratios? I've read the problem and I may not know much at this point, but I do know I'm qualifying a buyer. So I know I can throw down 2 T-bars. We got to start somewhere. When in doubt, throw a T-bar down. So in this case, we get to throw down 2. I know the numbers that we're trying to meet. We're using our 28%. We're using our 36%. And in this case, what we're solving for are monthly expenses. Our X is the number on top. We know Brian has annual income of $35,000. Margaret has annual income of $38,000. So together, the two have an annual income $73,000. We don't want annual though, do we? We want monthly. So we're going to take that, do a quick divide by 12. So we get monthly income of $60.83. I just rounded a little bit, probably $6,083.33. And again, I'm talking about the same people. We're still talking about Brian and Margaret. So their monthly income is going to be the same. So we're solving for our monthly expenses. We know the monthly income. And we know the qualifying ratios that we're trying to get them approved under. Questions so far? So let's start first with the 28%. So our formula tells us we take our income of $60,083.33 and times it by our 28%. So under this housing ratio, they have allowable housing expenses of $1,703.33. So they're allowing housing expenses under the first ratio. They can have housing expenses, PITI, HOA, and PMI, $6,083. I'm sorry, $1,703.33. The 36% ratio looks at housing expenses and reoccurring debt. The second ratio looks at both. So the first thing we need to do is solve for that number on top. What is that number that is housing expenses and reoccurring debt? So 6083 times 36% gives me 2189.9988. So let's just say 2190 here. And understand this is reoccurring debt. Let's just pretend that that's spelled right. RECURRIND. So we have total housing expenses and reoccurring obligations, reoccurring debt of $2,190. The lender just wants to do a side-by-side comparison of housing expenses only. So on the 36% ratio, to look at just housing expenses, we need to come through now and deduct those reoccurring obligations of $700. So that gives us just housing expenses under the 36% ratio of $1,490. So we have housing expenses under the 28% of 1,703, under the 36% of 1,490. Of those two, which one are they going to be approved for? Which one will they qualify for? And we're looking for the lower of the two numbers. So what's their allowable housing expenses for this loan? $1,490. Again, lender hat on, through the eyes of the lender. Which one is less risky? The one that has more debt or the one that has less debt? Through the eyes of the lender, it's the one, that's right, it's the one with less debt. So when the problem asks you for the maximum payment, opposite world says we want the lower of the two numbers. Questions on this one? Let's see. How do we know whose reoccurring obligation debt? How do we know whose? I'm not sure I understand that. Other question, why do we subtract 700? Because we want to do, remember, this 36% looks at housing expenses plus reoccurring debt. The lender is just going to care about housing expenses. So with that 2190, we need to deduct $700. So now we have apples to apples. Housing expenses in the 28%, housing expenses in the 36%, because we deducted the 700 and took that out of the equation. So now we're just looking at those housing expenses. Does debt play a part? Well, you better believe it. I hate to say it, but in America, it's that reoccurring debt that prevents a lot of us from getting a loan. We like our debt here, don't we? So it's that debt that prevents us from getting that loan. However, what we're looking for is the lender wants to know what's the maximum payment that they can afford. So they got to pay their debt, but what's the most they can pay me? How do we know who's recurring obligation between Brian and Margaret? Brian and Margaret are married, so it's both of their debt. What's mine is yours. So Brian and Margaret are in this together. So whose debt is it? Doesn't matter. They're married. They acquired each other's debt. There's a lot to think about before y'all get married. I'm gonna leave it at that. Including how much debt does this person have? Anything else on this one? Maximum payment, the lower of the two numbers. That's right. That's right. Tenants by the entirety. Flashback to unit 2. Ah. Okay. All right, we're going to go and take our break. When we come back, we're going to solve for monthly income. Okay, so we got one more of these to do. We're going to solve for monthly income, but let's take 10 first. Welcome back. How's everybody faring in this storm? Doing good? Good. I think it's moving on. I have to water my garden tonight, so there's that. All right, let's see. Let's take attendance. And we got one more of these qualifying a buyer problems to do. And I also have a message into Jane about how I can fix this. So maybe by the end of the class, she'll be able to help us out. So we solved for the qualifying ratio. We based on income and expenses and whether or not they would qualify under the ratios. In this problem, we found their allowable maximum housing expense, their allowable maximum payment. The third candidate, possible candidate for a test question, is finding the minimum income. So there's a few things to understand about finding that minimum income. First, using the 28% ratio, we're going to take those housing expenses and we're going to divide by 28% to get the allowable minimum income under the 28% ratio. Under the 36, we're going to add our housing expenses and our reoccurring obligations to find the minimum income and divide those by 36%. And again, opposite world. When the problem asks for the minimum income, we're going to run those two T-bars twice. And which one they're going to qualify under is the higher of the two numbers. When they want the minimum income, we're looking for the higher of the two numbers. Again, lender hat on. Which borrower is less risky? The one that makes more money or the one that makes less money? Which one is less risky? The one that makes more money. So when they ask for the minimum income, we want the higher of the two numbers. We want the lowest monthly expense and the highest income. Is your lender hat on? Can we see this? The more money you make, the less risky you are. The less debt you have, the less risky you are. So again, we're going to look at another problem together. Solve for the minimum income and figure out which of the qualifying ratios they qualify under. We good? Everybody have this so far? Good so far? Okay, so let's look at a problem together. Charles and Hannah want to buy a home with a PITI of $1,900 per month. PMI will be $60 per month and their HOA dues are $600 per year. Recurring debt is $1,100 per month. What is the minimum monthly income needed using our 28-36% ratios? So again, I've read the problem. I know with qualifying a buyer, I need two T-bars. Again, I may not know what else to do at this point, but with qualifying a buyer, we always got to run it twice. We got to run it under two different circumstances. The first circumstance is the 28%. The second is the 36%. What we are solving for this time is their monthly income. Questions so far before we look at these top numbers? So let's look at the 28% first. 28% is their housing expenses. Housing expenses consist of PITI, PMI if applicable, and HOA dues if applicable. This one's got it all, don't they? So housing expenses are going to be their PITI, $1,900, their PMI of $60 per month, and then their monthly HOA dues. The problem gives me annual HOA dues. So we need to take 600 divided by 12 to get $50 a month for HOA dues. And we add up their monthly housing expenses, we get $20,010. This 28% ratio, our back fourth line on the T-bar means divide. So we take our 2010 and divide it by 28%. And that gives me a monthly income under this ratio of $7,178.57. In order to qualify for this loan under the 28% ratio, just looking at housing expenses, Charles and Hannah need to make $7,178.57 a month between the two of them. Questions on that one, the 28%? Now we look at the 36%. The 36% looks at their housing expenses plus their reoccurring debt. Yep, words matter, don't they? Per year. Again, there's your distractor. So 600 divided by 12 gives us $50 a month HOA dues. The second one looks at housing expenses plus reoccurring debt. So we've already found the housing expenses. So now we just need to add to it our reoccurring debt to get total housing expenses plus reoccurring debt of $3,110. So we took their housing expenses, PITI, PMI, and HOA. We add to it, it's their reoccurring debt, those bills you sit down and pay every single month. We got total housing expenses and reoccurring debt, $3,110. That fourth line on the T-bar means divide. So we take 3,110 divided by 36%. And we get monthly income of $8,638.89. The problem asks for minimum monthly income. Based on the two ratios, which one are they going to get approval on? The minimum income of $71,079 or the minimum income of $86,038? Which one is less risky to the lender? And the one less risky to the lender, you guys got this. Awesome. The one less risky to the lender is the one that the borrower makes the most money. So in order for them to get this loan, for them to get approval, they've got to make $8,638.89 a month. If they don't make that much, we're not going to get loan approval. Again, it's not over yet. Maybe we find them a less expensive home, something where their monthly payment isn't $1,900 per month. Maybe we have them pay off their debt. How did I get 31,000 instead of the 1,100? I added their their housing expenses of 2010 plus their reoccurring debt. The second ratio looks at both housing expenses and reoccurring debt. So minimum monthly income, opposite world says we want the higher of the two numbers. Questions? We good? Can I erase the blue? Okay. The last thing I have with this, we've already seen these, but I do think sometimes a nice side-by-side comparison helps. So those things you guys have written down about the maximum payment, the minimum income, here they are side by side. You may want to take a screenshot here. Remember, my PowerPoints are in the online learning system, so you have this slide. But this helps us see the difference. Your third scenario is just to solve for that qualifying ratio and see if it falls under the 28 or the 36%. The reason they set these limits, you guys, if we think about this, remember we said your 28%, your housing expenses can only be 28% of your monthly income. The 36%, you can only have 30% of housing expenses and recurring debt of your monthly income. All we've done at this point is pay bills, haven't we? We still haven't eaten dinner. We haven't put gas in the car. Do you want to go out and buy a new pair of jeans? Right? That's all we've done to this point is paid bills, paid housing expenses, and paid recurring debt. So they limit those expenses because they understand we still have to live. By the way, we haven't even paid our power bill yet. We haven't paid our water bill. We haven't paid our internet. We haven't paid those things. Those aren't included in these. So the reason they cap them is so we still have money to go out and like live and eat dinner and put gas in our car and all that kind of stuff. 28% is just housing expenses. 36% is housing expenses plus recurring debt. What questions do I have? Qualifying a buyer math. Guess what? We made it through financing. Lender hats off. Throw them, chuck them behind you somewhere, right? Until it's time to take your test. Don't throw it too far away. Hang on. We got to get you through the exams. Again, in the real world, yes, a basic understanding of financing helps because we're the ones working with the borrowers, the buyers that are generating these loans. So be able to help them understand some questions, understand some points. Bottom line, though, we're still going to ultimately refer them to our lenders. But now we have a general idea of how loans work. So our key terms for Unit 15 are back on page 389. Our key point review is on page 414. And then our student quiz is on page 417. There's some math at the end of the student quiz. Turn with me real quick. Let's go back in your book for 1 second to page 387. 387. In 387, we had those three problems, 28, 29, and 30, that I said, hold off on those for a minute. You're missing a piece. You now have the piece that you need to do those three problems. And the piece that you were missing was how to solve for the monthly debt service. So now that we know that you take the loan amount times the rate factor and divide it by 1,000 to get the monthly principal and interest, you can now do those three problems, 28, 29, and 30, and they all feed off of each other. Also in Unit 15, you do have a math concepts. This is solving for the monthly debt service. No qualifying a buyer, but this is solving for the debt service. And then there's those 50 problems in the back of the book. These are the numbers that relate to the math, or to the principal and interest. So finding that monthly debt service. These are the numbers that relate to the math that we just did. And then also, if we go out and look at the online learning system, of course, there's some good stuff. There's some good stuff in Unit 14 and 15. There's some financing quizzes in 14. 15 has some practice quizzes. It has some math practice, another financing quiz. So all the financing math is going to be here in the online learning system. So as you go through these, you can get some extra practice here. In addition, there are, let's see. It's either this one or this one, but one of these does have some extra, here it is. The 14 and 15 math. Here's some qualifying a buyer problems. So you do have some practice here. Of course, we have the solutions as well. Solutions aren't going to help you learn it. Solutions just helping you figure out how to work it. Another thing I want to introduce you guys to, also in the online learning system, down here near the bottom, you guys see where it says math? We have a folder for math. Does everybody see this so far? Okay. So there's some extra works. There's some extra stuff here. One of being a math workbook. They kind of take the different topics that we've talked about, for example, tax calculations, give you another explanation, a way to solve it, and then offer practice problems. So there's tax calculations. There is area and volume. This is what we did in Unit 4. So if you're looking for extra math on Unit 4, we got the math workbook for you. Excise tax, we saw that in Unit 5. Closing statement, we will see that in Unit 21. So if you get to math we haven't covered yet in the math workbook, you can skip that for now and come back to it. But this offers some extra practice. And of course, we have the solutions in here as well, so you can work through it. There's a gift within this math workbook. Do you guys want a gift? Who wants a present? Yeah, me. Page 1 of the math workbook is your present. Question is, what math can I expect to see on the state exam? What math can I expect to see on Julie's exam? And the answer to that is on page 1 of the math workbook. So this tells us your broker license exam. What math can you expect to see at PSI Testing Center? Here it is. What math can you expect to see on your real estate pre-licensing course final exam? Ta-da. Use this to help you study. First up, you got to get through my test. This is your math. Once you get through my test, you're going to go get ready for the state exam. There's your math. You going to get a better present today? Questions? Like I said, we haven't done all the math. 14, 15, and soon to be 21 are heavy math units. So once we get through math through 21, we're done with most of the math. Once we get through 21, we have a little bit more left to do, but we're right at that cusp right now. We get through 21. You guys can really start honing in on this math, and we don't have much more to do after that. We'll only pick the calculator up a few more times after 21. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but I might as well ask. In the Relink book, I saw that real estate financing, there's 12 questions on the national section. Do you know, since you're saying that these units are heavy math units, do you think that those are majority math questions, or do you think
No.
that they're
Because
okay.
also when we look at Relink, what Joy's referring to is this little breakdown on page 16. So this breaks down the different topics. So Joy's saying real estate financing, you can expect to see 12 questions. When we look ahead a little bit further, you have a whole section for real estate mathematics. So of all the math we're covering, you can expect to see 8 questions, and that will include financing. So,
Okay, that helps. Thank
Yep.
you.
so this financing, the 12 for your state exam, the 12 questions for the financing is going to be on the terminology and the verbiage. No, it's a good question. Because part of what we're doing is trying to interpret the commission. Anything else?
So I know you can't tell us grades and such, but overall, how did we all do as a group on our midterm?
Overall, we didn't do terrible. We didn't do terrible. I think some of us took it more seriously than others, so there's factors involved there.
I mean,
But
I know how
hopefully-
personally I did, but I
Yeah,
felt
sure.
really good about it, but my grade didn't show that.
So did it help? I mean, did it give you some insight, maybe help you with your areas of weakness? I mean,
No,
like,
actually-
unanswered questions, rhetorical questions. I mean, did you leave a lot of time on the table? If you left a lot of time on the table, then maybe that's telling you that you can slow down in reading a little bit. If you blew through it in 30 minutes and you failed, slow down. You got time to read. So hopefully we're just kind of using that as a gauge of where you are.
Well, when I thought that some of the questions that I thought I knew really well,
Mhm.
and then the ones that I didn't, I mean, I took the time and I read them and I read them and I read them and I read them out loud, and I actually took my time on those, and the other ones that I thought I knew, and I just answered them. So then when my grade came back, and I was like, wow, but I didn't know which ones, seriously, I don't know which ones I got wrong. So that's why I was,
Right. And Morgan, it would help you to see the questions. Listen, I hear what you guys are saying. I do. But hear me. You're never going to see those specific questions again. What we want to know is, how did you do overall in Unit 7? How did you do overall in Unit 6? Because I tell you, you're going to get test questions on Unit 7. Not those, but you will get test questions. So given that overall picture, and again, you can use that report to kind of help you gauge. And make sure we're keeping up too, because guys, you notice we just keep going, right? So it's a lot. This is a lot. I understand that. So I hope we have dedicated study time, because we're 3 weeks away, y'all. 3 weeks from today, we're taking a test. So hunker down. But I think, Mary, to your point, I mean, a big part of it is interpreting those questions, interpreting the words and the answer choices. And that's why we offer so much practice. It's not just about knowing the material. You know the material. Now, the second piece of that is, can you interpret those dang test questions? And that's what we got to do. We get the knowledge you have, and we got to spit it out in the form of A, B, C, or D. So it's twofold. It really is. Knowing it and properly reading and interpreting those questions. Score you should have been aiming for on the midterm, passing was 75%. Passing for my final exam is 75%. Yep, barely. Okay, anything else? All right. Y'all ready to go to closing? Closing day is a good day. I like closing day. So let's go to closing. Skip ahead, Unit 21. We're starting on page 526. And this is going to walk us through the contract to closing process. So we've created agency, we got buyers and sellers under contract. Now the question is, now what do we do? So Unit 21, our roadmap, our guide, we're going to talk about some pre-closing procedures, things to get ready for. We're going to talk a little bit more, explain tread further. And then the star of Unit 21, we're going to calculate what I refer to as a mini settlement statement or a mini closing disclosure. Mini because you will have a test question that asks, how much does the buyer have to bring to closing? So we're going to calculate, we're going to look at all the buyer's debits, and we're going to look at all the buyer's credits. And we're going to figure out what the buyer is going to have to bring on the day of settlement, their portion, in order to purchase this home. It's mini because we're not doing a full-blown settlement statement. So in other words, we're not going to ask you what the seller is going to get from closing. You get to do a full-blown settlement statement when you come to post licensing. So that gives you something to look forward to. Right now, we're just doing the mini. Okay. So let's talk about this contract to closing process. When I'm working with buyers and sellers and we talk about the contract to closing process, I tell them to think about working gears. So let's label our gears. Let's give one gear to the listing agent and the seller. Let's give another gear to the selling agent and the buyer. Let's put the lender on a gear, the home inspector on a gear, the attorney on a gear, the surveyor on the gear, who else? The pest inspector on a gear. All those people that are involved in contract to closing get their own gear. What happens if any one of these gears stops? The whole dang process stops, doesn't it? Part of our job as the agent and contract to closing, keeping these gears moving, keeping these gears going and keeping all these working parts moving and heading towards settlement, getting to that. So as the agent, not only are involved with our buyer, seller, client, but we're also involved with the lender, the home inspector, the surveyor, the attorney, the pest inspector, all those people involved. And we're making sure that these gears keep going. As we learned back in Unit 10, closing is a number of events. Part of closing includes settlement. I'm on the wrong page. You guys got that, 518. So part of closing includes settlement. Settlement is when buyer seller go to the attorney's office, bring any money they owe, and sign their paperwork. Once we all leave settlement, the closing attorney proceeds and continues on with closing. So having that understanding, that difference between settlement and closing. By the way, in your book on page 518, you see the italicized on 518. That's straight from the offer to purchase and contract. So remember the first provision of our offer to purchase and contract terms and definitions. We're just defining things. And one thing we defined was settlement. Another thing we defined was closing. So these pre-closing procedures, the buyer hires the attorney. The buyer hires the closing attorney. Thus, the closing attorney represents the buyer in this transaction. Sellers can always have their own representation. Anybody can always hire their own attorney. In a typical residential real estate transaction, the buyer hires the attorney. The seller allows the buyer's attorney to prepare their documents for closing. That's a resale residential. When we start getting into estates and commercial sales, buyers and sellers are more than likely to have their own representation. So no, in a typical resale, buyer hires the attorney. Again, the seller is more than welcome to hire their own, or they can allow the buyer's closing attorney to prepare their documents. Buyer's agents. Once we get those buyers and sellers under contract, we had a ratified contract in our hand. Do your little happy dance. We have communication and we have acceptance of communication. So Yay, we're under contract. Celebrate the small wins. As soon as you do your little happy dance, buyer's agents, I need you to do two things ASAP. Once we have that ratified contract, the first thing I need you to do is send the contract to the lender. The loan process is the longest part of the contract to closing process. So as soon as we have that signed contract in our hand, we've got to get the lender started. Once you send that signed contract to the lender, buyer's agents, the second thing you need to do is send it to your buyer's attorney so they can start their thing. Remember, the buyer's attorney is going to do things like the very thorough search of the public records to make sure that their client is getting clear marketable title. If they find issues in the public records, if they find kinks in those chains, then the closing attorney will get with the seller prior to settlement to get that cleared up, to get that issue taken care of. Because the attorney's responsibility is providing clear marketable title to their buyer client. So everything the attorney does is for that to achieve that end goal. If the buyer doesn't have an attorney they want to use, do they use the firms? No, the buyer has to use an attorney. The buyer may not know of any closing attorneys, and that's where they can ask us, who do you recommend? So we can provide names, people we've used in the past, but they will have to get their own. If the firm has their own attorney, the firm's going to use that for them in other cases, other situations. But we absolutely can make recommendations. And again, you guys remember, whenever we're recommending vendors, we're never going to look at the buyer and say, this is the attorney you're going to use and you're going to like it. We're always going to give them choices. Here's a list of 2 or 3 attorneys that I've used in the past that I've had a good experience with. Consider one of these. Give them choices, give them options. If I recommend 3 closing attorneys, does the buyer have to use any of those 3 I recommend? Nah, they can use any closing attorney they want to. I'm just trying to prevent them from going to Google to find a closing attorney. I don't know all, but I think I have a better handle than Google. I'm just saying. You know what you find in Google sometimes, right? I don't want my buyer to find that. So based on your past experience or your firm's past experience, absolutely, we can make recommendations.
So quick question.
Huh?
If you are buying a new home from, if you're buying like a new home,
Mhm.
yeah, do you get to choose your attorney, or the seller just sends you to anyone that they know?
You should be able to choose your attorney, but builders like to use incentives, right? Like we'll knock $6,000 off the purchase price or $6,000 the closing cost if you use our attorney. So when you're talking that builder, they probably have their own, and they're going to encourage the buyer to use their attorney, but the buyer's still under no obligation. The buyer can use whatever attorney they want. They're going to give you incentives, of course. But hear me when I say that attorney is the builder's attorney. They represent the seller. So your buyer may not like that, right? So they have choices.
Okay. Never knew that.
Let's see. About North Carolina versus title company. I don't think you're going to see any national questions, because you're right. National could be attorney, it could be title company. Honestly, North Carolina is where we're only like one of 6 states that use an attorney still. The majority of the country uses a title attorney. So this would probably be specific to North Carolina, because we are an attorney state. Does the agent speak to the lawyer for the client? Oh yeah, we're in communication with the attorney, the paralegal. So again, you guys, we're helping those gears move. We're keeping those gears moving. So we are involved. The buyer doesn't know to schedule the attorney. That's my job. The buyer doesn't know what to say to the paralegal, right? So that's why they have us. Yep. So we're going to settlement, we're going to closing, and I know the number one burning question you have on your brain right now is, Julie, blah, 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 when do I get paid? I want my money. Guys, we don't get paid until it closes. What's the last act of closing? The final step? Recordation of the deed. It's not a done deal until that deed changes hands. So we go to settlement, we leave settlement, the attorney does closing. Once that deed changes hands, then we go back and get our money. We get an email from the attorney. It's my favorite email in this industry. It's short, sweet, and to the point. Y'all want to know what it says? The attorney or the paralegal is going to send you an email that says, we are on record. You know what that means to me? Go get your money, give your buyer their key. Then and only then is it a done deal. Please do not go to settlement and ask the attorney, where's my check? We don't get paid at settlement. I know you thought you were going to, right? We don't get paid at settlement. We get paid. And guess what? The attorney doesn't get paid until it closes. The lender, some vendors, for example, the home inspector may allow the buyer to pay for the home inspection at settlement. They'll perform the home inspection. They'll allow the buyer to pay cash. They may offer like 10% off if you can pay cash today. But remember, this buyer's in the process of buying a daggum house. So they may not be able to pay the home inspector cash today. So most of our home inspectors say, if you can't pay me on the day of the home inspection, I'll allow you to pay me at settlement. That home inspector isn't going to get paid until it closes. If that buyer terminates after the home inspection has been performed, the buyer's still under the obligation to pay the home inspector. So if it doesn't close, the home inspector did a job. And whether or not you close or not, the home inspector expects to be paid. Does this make sense? So what a lot of home inspectors are doing are requiring a credit card from borrowers, because if it doesn't close, they still want to ensure that they can get paid. So once this thing closes is when everybody's standing there with their hand out going, give me, give me, give me. That's right. And actually the check I'm picking up to the attorney is not made out to Julie Campbell. The check that I'm picking up to the attorney is made out to Julie's real estate shop. The firm gets the check. The firm shares their money with us. Good question. So the contract to closing process, most of the work to be done in the contract to closing process is on the buyers. The buyers have all the work to do. Remember when we were talking about working with sellers? We said all the work you do with a seller is done up front before we ever list the property, before you ever see it online, because we got to measure and take pictures and verify and DOT and zoning and blah. All that work is done up front before you ever see it online. Now we're talking about buyer's agents. Pretty much buyer's agents work starts when we get our buyer under contract. Because pretty much up to that point, we're just driving around looking at pretty houses, writing offers, hoping they get accepted. But as a buyer's agent, my big job comes in and begins. And it's because of the responsibilities of the buyer through their due diligence. So remember, the buyer's due diligence, again, this is straight from your offer to purchase and contract. You can see it again on page 519. The buyer's due diligence process, remember, is the buyer's opportunity to investigate the property, to decide in their sole discretion whether they want to move forward and purchase, or if they want to exercise their rights under due diligence and terminate. This is the buyer's decision to make, and how they make that decision as they follow their due diligence process. So what are some things that the buyer should do during their due diligence process? Well, number one, we got to get loan approval. And it's a process and it takes a while. So get it started now. Once you submit the contract to the lender will start reaching out to the buyer for additional information. They need documentation, they need paperwork. So the lender will reach out to the buyer, request this and that and everything else. Understand the lender does things in steps. So we have like step 1, step 2, step 3. The lender can't do step 2 until step 1 is complete. So it's really important, buyer's agents, that we have a conversation with our buyers about the importance of communicating with the lender. I tell my buyers, when we go under contract, you make that lender a priority. I tell my buyers to call the lender back before they call me back. When we go under contract, the lender is number one. Would it surprise you guys if I told you that there have been buyers to delay their own closing because of poor communication with the lender? Right? So how can we help keep those gears going? Buyer's agents, have the conversation with your buyer. If the lender requests a document, get it to them. If the lender needs a signature, go in and e-sign it. The lender's asking for a reason, so just comply with them. Another part of the buyer's due diligence is to investigate the property. Any of the property investigation is going to be at the buyer's expense. These are going to be their inspections, their surveys. We're going to talk a little bit about your pest inspection in just a second. Is there a septic tank? Do we want to have that inspected? Is the property on well water? Do we want to have that inspected? Whatever it is that the buyer wants to learn about the property, this is their time to conduct their property investigation. Is the property in an HOA? We want to get our hands on those covenants and those bylaws so they can review those. The home inspection is generally a good place to start. The home inspector does like an overall broad view. First off, let's understand the home inspector's job is to go into the home and find the problems. Prepare your buyers for this, because the home inspection can look scary, because all they're doing is going in and saying, this is broke, that's not working. And it can look pretty bad. We got to prepare our buyers. Tell your buyers, they're not going to get a report from the home inspector telling them how lovely their home is that they're getting ready to buy. It's going to be the opposite. I tend to think of the home inspector as like your general practitioner. So when you go to the doctor once a year for a checkup, they know a little bit about a whole lot of things, right? And if something comes up in your results or something causes your general practitioner to raise a red flag, don't they encourage you to talk to another specialist? I found this, go talk to somebody else. That's kind of like the home inspector. They know a little bit about a whole lot. If they have a concern about the electrical, they're going to encourage the buyer to talk to an electrician. If they have concern about the plumbing, they're going to encourage to talk to a plumber, general contractor, structural engineer, whatever the concern is. The home inspector is not going to say, this is an electrical issue and this is what you have to do to fix it, and I can come back and do it for X amount. The home inspector's job is to inspect the property. And when they find concerns, they're going to encourage the buyer to talk to the specialist. Everybody good so far? We're all still in due diligence. So the home inspector says, oh my gosh, this electrical is shot. Nothing about this electrical is good. I recommend you talk to an electrician. We're still in due diligence. So now under the buyer property investigation, the buyer would want to consider having an electrician come in and diagnose the problem, and more importantly, put a figure on it. Is this electrical issue because we need to change the light bulb? Or is it because this stuff is getting ready to blow and the house is going to burn down? You guys with me? That's the electrician's job to determine why the electrical isn't working. The home inspector just says, ooh, that's broke. Questions on so far, buyer's loan and property investigation.
Are the home inspector can go through the property by themselves, but are we allowed to be there throughout the home inspection process, or no, we have to just wait for the report?
Buyers are encouraged to attend, not get under their feet in their way or anything, but that's a great way for a buyer to learn about their home. Buyer's agents should be there too, because we're allowing a representative of the buyer into the seller's home. So somebody needs to be there just to, so some inspectors may say, look, buyers, let me do my thing. If you'll meet me at the end, I can go through and find my reportings with you. Because like I said, some buyers like to get in the way and underfoot. So inspector may say, just meet me in the last 20 minutes and we'll go through my findings together.
Okay, but the agent probably should be there.
Should be there, yeah, because you're allowing a representative of the buyer in the seller's home by themselves. Put yourself in the seller's shoes, you know,
makes sense.
so. But yeah, as far as the buyer goes, again, we just don't want them to get in the way. And you know what buyers like to do when they're figuring out how to buy, they like to get in the way. And I'm telling you guys right now, buyers' dads are the absolute best. I love buyers' dads. We'll leave it at that. All right, let's take 10. We come back, we're still working through due diligence. Welcome back. We are taking attendance. And talked about the buyer's loan, property investigation, homeowner's insurance. Once the buyer gets the lender satisfied with the paperwork and the signatures and they need to be able to send that loan through the first round of underwriting, while we are still in due diligence, we want our buyer to shop around for homeowner's insurance. Not all people, not all properties are easily insurable. If you have a claim history, you can expect a higher homeowner's insurance. We're going to talk about this process. This is Unit 13. So we will talk more about it, but we need to get the buyer shopping around. Again, we're not going to tell them one home insurance agent to use. We're going to let them give them some suggestions so they can shop around and find out which policy is best for them and make sure that it works for the lender. If a buyer's getting a loan, homeowner's insurance is required. Period. End of story. If it's a cash buyer, homeowner's insurance is highly recommended. So the lender has to sign off on the insurance company. So we need to get the buyer shopping around now while we're in due diligence to make sure that they can afford it. Because remember that PITI and their allowable monthly payment. So if homeowner's insurance tips them over that allowable monthly payment, we're not going to get loan approval. So tell them, have them call Jake from State Farm, have them call Flo from Progressive, have them shop around so they can find the policy that's best for them. The lender requires the appraisal. The appraisal is actually the property of the lender. The lender wants the appraisal so they can determine value. Remember, we said value is the purchase price or the appraisal, whichever is less. So through the eyes of the lender, they're going to require that appraisal. Lender requires it, but they do let the buyer pay for it. So that's nice. We're going to talk about the appraisal. Our next unit is Unit 17, and that's our appraisal unit. So we'll talk more about that. Welcome back. We're going to encourage the buyer to have a survey. We talked about this back in Unit 4. We want the survey to identify the property lines. It's also going to identify things like encroachments and easements, those things. So we want to encourage the buyer to have a survey done. If the property is on an on-site septic system, we're going to encourage a septic inspection as part of the due diligence. They can come in and inspect the tank, see how it is, check the capacity, make sure there's no leaks, basically make sure it's in good condition. Listing agents, prepare your sellers for this. Do y'all know how you inspect an underground on-site septic system? They're gonna bring in the backhoe. Prepare your sellers for that day. They'll fill it back in, pat the dirt back down when they're done. But if they want to inspect the tank, they got to get to it. Who remembers how many human heartbeats per bedroom the septic permit allows for? Yep, 2 human heartbeats per bedroom. So again, the permit tells us the allowable uses, the capacity. The inspection is looking at the tank itself, the lines to and from the tank, etc. Buyers are also encouraged to get a wood destroying insect report, also known as a pest inspection. Now understand, the pest inspection that we refer to is only looking for wood destroying insects. So termites, those little buggers can do some damage fast. Termites or evidence of termites, carpenter bees, powder post beetles, things that eat wood. The pest inspector and the home inspector will probably look for evidence of other pests, particularly the home inspector is going to look for evidence of other pests. But the pest inspector is specifically looking for wood destroying insect report. For the most part, these are highly recommended. The exception to this rule is if your buyer is getting a VA loan. VA loan requires the pest inspection. The buyer must get a wood destroying insect report if they are getting a VA loan. There's a sample pest inspection in your book on page 522. And on page 522, about halfway down in number 3, the pest inspector is looking for evidence, visible evidence of pests. We're not necessarily looking for the termite themselves, but the inspector is looking for evidence of termites. So for example, one thing they're looking for are termite tunnels. And termites are going to build tunnels on the side of the house so they can get from the ground up to the wood of the house. So if they see those tunnels, maybe there's still termites, maybe there's not, but we know they've at least been there. And that's what they're looking for is evidence. One time in my career, I saw an active termite tunnel, which means I saw those little things crawling up down in the tunnels. Creeped me out. I hope to never see that again. That was not a good day. But it answered the question, do I have termites? Yeah, man, you do. They're right there. Once the buyer gets through their inspections, they're doing all their inspections and investigations. Again, their due diligence is so they can study, so they can learn as much about the property as they possibly can to decide if they want to move forward with or terminate the transaction. And once they've done all the inspections, the buyer may ask the seller to do any repairs. First off, is the seller obligated to do any repairs? Nah. Not only are we still in a caveat emptor state, buyer beware, but guys, remember, there's a very important sentence in our offer to purchase and contract that says this property is being sold in its current condition. What if buyer and seller contractually obligated agree to contractually that this property is being sold in its current condition? So understand that, have this conversation with your buyers. We can ask the seller to do repairs. The worst thing they can do is say no. They can't terminate the contract because you asked. They can't have any kind of financial consequences because you asked. The worst they can do is say no. The request to do a repair is an offer. When receiving that offer, what are the seller's 3 choices? They can accept to do the repairs, they can reject to do the repairs, or they can counter it. Maybe I don't want to do everything. Instead of these 5 items, how about I do 2 of them, right? So when we're asking for repairs, in a sense, we're entering into round 2 of negotiations. We're back in that boxing ring, aren't we? Gloves are back on and we're back at it. Understand, the seller's not obligated to participate in those negotiations. This past couple years with this strong seller market we've been in, how many repairs do y'all think have been being done by sellers in the last few years? Not many. But as that pendulum swings back and we find ourselves coming more and more in a buyer's market, sellers may feel obligated to do repairs. I don't want to lose this buyer because it may be 3 or 4 months before we get another one. That's a buyer's market. If the seller agrees to do any repairs, we're going to have those agreed upon repairs in writing and signed by all parties while we are still in due diligence. Agreed upon repairs must be in writing and signed while we are still in due diligence. Remember, buyer's opportunity to learn about much about the properties they can. So they have their home inspection, pest inspection, they have all these inspections done and they find a whole bunch of problems with the home because that's the inspector's jobs. They ask the seller to do repairs. They say yes, no, or not all of them. The buyer now has a decision to make. Now knowing what I know and including what, if any, the seller is willing to do for repairs, do I want to move forward with and terminate this transaction? And that's why the agreement has to be signed in writing and signed while we're still in due diligence. Because if the seller says no, if the seller says yes, the buyer still has a choice to make. Yes, ma'am.
So with that, if they are to agree to the repairs, would that be an addendum added to the original offer to purchase and contract? Would that be them just simply making the changes on the current contract and initialing and dating, or would it be a complete novation of that contract?
It's not an addendum and it's not an ovation. It would be an amendment. We were going to amend the original agreement. And of the whole contract, all we are amending is that one sentence. Because if the seller agrees to do anything, if the seller agrees to change a light bulb, this property is no longer being sold in its current condition. So we have an amendment, the seller signs it, they are now contractually obligated to do those
Okay.
repairs.
Okay, that
So
makes
if the
sense.
seller agrees to do anything, we've amended the contract.
Okay, and you would add the amendment, like, is there a form for the amendment? I'm
I got
assuming?
a form for that. Yep.
Okay, and
You'll
then
need
you
that
just
form in
scratch out that
post-licensing.
line.
No, you're
And
not
then
going to
you'll
touch
just-
I mean, you can touch the contract, but you can either use the form to amend it or
Uh-huh.
you can change it on the contract.
Got it. Okay, so it's not something you have to do both.
No, no.
Okay, got it.
Your firm may prefer you to use the form just because it keeps things nice and clean and we have a good paper trail. The firm may not care. I don't care, just as long as the parties acknowledge the change, acknowledge the amendment, and that's what we need. The form just keeps things nice and clean.
Thank you.
Of course. So we have the form in writing and signed, all agreed upon repairs while we're still in due diligence. The repairs themselves don't have to be complete until prior to settlement. So there's this period of time between due diligence and settlement. Is that a week? Is it 5 weeks? Don't know. It's completely negotiable. But there's a period of time between due diligence and settlement. That's when any agreed upon repairs need to be addressed. Keep in mind too, you guys, remember what we said early in our time together, anything's negotiable. So if the buyer, for example, asks for repairs, and maybe we don't have a lot of time between due diligence and settlement, maybe the seller just doesn't want to deal with it. Guys, sometimes sellers, the closer we get to settlement, the more done they are. And if we're a couple weeks away, they just may not want to mess with it. They're done. They're ready to move on. So it's all negotiable. Maybe in lieu of repairs, we can renegotiate the purchase price. Or in lieu of repairs, the seller can agree to pay some of the buyer's closing costs. So when we ask for repairs, understand that could take a twist. We are literally back in round 2 of negotiations, and the parties can agree to whatever makes them happy. Negotiations is a fine art. It's a fine science. And that's not something we cover here. The recommendation, if you're not familiar with negotiation and negotiation strategies, it's recommended when you get your license and you start looking for classes to take, find you a good one of the art of negotiations. It's not always a I win, you lose. A successful negotiation can be a we win. Both parties can agree to be happy. So there's more there for you guys to look forward to. That due diligence period, the drop dead date and time, that's that buyer's right to terminate. Remember, the contract specifically says for any reason or no reason at all. So they get that home inspection back. They talk to the electrician. The pest inspection notice active termite tunnels, right? We now all have all sorts of laundry list of problems with the house that the buyer learned in their investigations. And now they got to sit and ask themselves, now knowing what I know, do I want to move forward with or terminate this transaction? If they terminate within due diligence, they'll get their earnest money back. If they terminate for any reason after due diligence, now the seller gets the earnest money. Also, part of their due diligence is a physical inspection. Hopefully, we can get the buyer in the home a couple times during the contract to closing process. We got them in the home once when we showed it to them, and they decided this is the one they wanted to make the offer on. Those of you that have bought a house, the first time you went in the home, I'm sure your rose-colored glasses were on, and you were going in the home looking at, can I see my family doing Sunday brunch here? And can I see this being my office and my study? And is this a good kitchen for me to cook in? The next time you go in the home, your rose-colored glasses come off a little bit more. The third time you go in, every time you go in, you see something that you didn't see it before. So the more they can see it, the more sure they are of it. Buyer's agents, when we go in the home with them, we need to help them see things that they're not seeing. Because what they're seeing is, how do my family dynamics play out in this home? You and I need to be looking for cracks, water stains, outlets with black smoke around them, indicating there was some electrical issue, right? You and I are helping them see the things that they're not. Remember, I'm not the one buying this house. So I need to go in there without thinking, I wonder how my husband and I can make this space work. That's not what it's about. It's about helping the buyer see things that they're not seeing. So encourage them. When we get under contract, I think Joy asked before break about meeting the home inspector. That's another opportunity we can get the buyer in the house to see more. Maybe they want to, I don't know, come back to the house with their tape measure and see where they're going to put their couch. Maybe they want to come back to the house with paint samples to see what color they want to paint. Maybe they want to bring mom and dad. It's okay to have them in the home a few times. I got to be with them. Let your buyers know they don't own this house yet. If they want to get back in for some kind of physical inspection, they need to contact me so I can schedule an appointment with the seller. It's not the buyer's home yet. There was an incident a couple of years ago. I can't make this stuff up. Sellers were under contract. They were sitting in their living room one evening watching TV. And lo and behold, here come the buyers looking in windows. I don't know about your house, but at mine, that's a good way to get yourself shot. Some people would call that trespassing, wouldn't they? Have this conversation with your buyers. It's not their home yet. So they don't have free reign to show up whenever they want to. Anytime they want to see it, they need to call you. Everybody good with that? So we're going to encourage them to get in a few times. Another piece of this physical inspection that's really important is the final walkthrough. The final walkthrough we're going to do as close to settlement as we possibly can. I try to do my walkthrough on the way to the attorney's office. Because remember, another important sentence in our contract says, when the buyer signs, they agree to accept the property in its current condition. So if they don't know what that current condition is, how do they know what they're agreeing to accept? So one way we can know that current condition is to do the final walkthrough, especially if nobody's ever seen that home vacant. If the seller just moved out yesterday, we want to see that thing vacant before you agree to take it in its current condition. Yes. So we want to make sure if we've only ever seen it vacant, we still want to do the final walkthrough. I'll share this with you guys. It's one of those stories that has stuck with me over the years. Did I tell you about the New York City skyline already? Did I tell you that story yet? Okay, good. So when I took post licensing, I got my license in 08. So I would have done post licensing in 08 or 09, somewhere in there. And one of my post licensing instructors said, her very first buyers ever, of course, very first buyers ever, they were getting ready for closing. And she asked the buyers, do y'all want to do the final walkthrough? And the buyer said, no, we're good. She said, okay, let's go to the attorney's office, no final walkthrough. Settlement happens, closing happens, deed changes hands, buyer gets the keys. They go to their new home. They call their agent, say, we need you to come over here, please. Agent's not having a good feeling in the pit of her stomach at this point. She drives over there. Luckily, the buyers answer the door and they're laughing. So this is a good sign. They take her back to the primary bedroom. And she said the primary bedroom looked like the New York City skyline. These guys didn't move the furniture. They painted around the furniture. They painted around the dresser and around the headboard and around the nightstand. Had they done the final walkthrough, they would have seen this home vacant and seen that. Luckily, these guys were laughing because they had plans to paint anyway. The importance of doing the final walkthrough. Even if your buyer says, no, I'm good, go do it without them and video, document your final walkthrough. This thing is tethered to us anyway. Use it. Use it to protect yourselves. Other things that the buyer may want to consider, we've talked about, they may want to consider inspecting during their due diligence. We may want to suggest they get the property tested for radon. If it was built prior to 1978, we want to help educate them about the possible dangers of lead-based paint in the home. They may want to encourage having that inspected. If also built prior to 78, it may have asbestos. If the home inspector detects or discovers mold, they may want to have that further looked into. If they're not on public water, they're on well water. They may want to consider having a well water test. And then looking into the streets, particularly if they're private. Remember, private streets are maintained by the homeowners. So again, looking into that information. I think the important thing to remember about this list of the buyer's due diligence that we're looking at is that this list isn't inclusive. This just helps the buyer, point the buyer to right direction of things to consider inspecting. One of my super simple philosophies, if it's important to me, then it's important to my buyer. So if my buyer wants it tested or inspected, investigated, my answer to them is, okie doke, let's do it. Because they're the ones trying to make sure that this home is good for their families. Questions on the buyer's due diligence process? Sellers don't have as much to worry about during due diligence. Seller pretty much cares about two things. Can my buyer get financing? Can they get money to buy my house? And the other thing the seller cares about is that their final numbers are right. Listing agents, we're going to want to review the seller's settlement statement prior to settlement. We'll talk more about that. And make sure the money that they're supposed to get from settlement is accurate. Help them determine their debits and credits. Both parties have certain sets of documents. Buyer's list is much longer. Seller's documents are on page 524. The seller's responsible for bringing their deed to settlement. Now, the attorney will handle that for them on behalf of their buyer client. But the seller has a responsibility to bring their deed so it can be signed over to the buyer. If we negotiated any personal property outside of closing, there may be a personal bill of, or a bill of sale for personal property. You don't have to show many homes before you walk into a garage with a buyer and see like a nice Jaguar or something sitting in the garage. And the buyer's going to say, does this come with the house? You know what I tell my buyer? Anything's negotiable. What's this Jag worth to you? You want to offer an amount? That would be an outside bill of sale. Everybody with me? So any personal property, outside bill of sale. If there's a current lease or tenant in place, the seller needs to provide those lease and related documents. Statements from the seller's lender, they got to have final payoff amounts for all of their outstanding liens. So the seller and the closing attorney will work together to get those final payoff amounts. Those are calculated to the day of closing. The seller's also going to sign an affidavit saying all mechanics have been paid. Remember our mechanics lien? They have 120 days to file the lien. So let's walk through a scenario. Buyer asks sellers to do repairs. Seller says, sure, I'll do repairs. Call you a couple days later and say the repairs are done. We go to settlement. Attorney does closing. The deed changes hands. 2 months later, the mechanic's not paid. They file a lien. Mechanic's lien is a specific lien, meaning it attaches to the property. Your brand new homeowner, unbeknownst to them, has a lien put on the property for the repairs that the seller agreed to do. Ouch. How do we prevent this? Well, let's back up for a second. Buyer's agents, when I'm asking for repairs, I'm also going to ask to see paid in full invoices, because that allows me to know that all those mechanics that they'd have over there doing that repair, they've been paid. It also allows the buyer to see who did the work. So if it breaks 2 days after closing, they know who to call. The other piece of that, the buyer's lender is going to require the seller to sign an affidavit saying, I promise all mechanics have been paid. Remember title insurance? The question is now, what if the seller lies? So we find out after closing, there was a mechanic lien because the seller didn't pay. Title insurance is going after the seller first, because they signed an affidavit saying this wasn't going to happen. So if things like that come up, again, we can try to prevent them, paid in full invoices, for example. But if they come up, this is why we have certain protocols in place, such as title insurance, for example. Yeah, that's it. Some sellers provide, man, some sellers are organized. And when you buy, they hand you a 3-ring binder and say, this is everything I've ever done to this house. That's the gift when you buy. That's a nice gift to get. Some sellers don't keep any documents and they have nothing to give you, right? So, or they may not want to, they don't have to. But yeah, that is definitely helpful when the seller, if they choose to provide that. The buyer also has documents. So at the top of page 525, of all the buyer's documents, the loan documents are what takes up. It's like a ream and a half of paper if you're getting a loan. If you're getting a USDA loan, you're probably looking at like 2.5 reams of paper. Those lenders just require more paperwork, require more stuff to sign. So the financing documents, the loan documents, if we're getting a loan, if we're using a lender, our new title insurance policy. Title insurance is protecting owners from errors of the past. Once you acquire that property, any error put on the title is your responsibility to clear up. We're just going to cover protect the owners from errors of the past. Property insurance required if we're getting a lender. There's our pest inspection, required if you're using VA. And then the survey Some lenders may require, not many, but that might be more situational. So if we're potentially in a flood zone, for example, the lender may require a survey just to see how severe that flood zone is we were in. But if they do get a survey, we'll have that. Various things for the attorneys in title procedures. Once we go under contract, we're sending them a copy of the contract. The attorney's going to do a preliminary title search. This is their very thorough search through the public records. If they find anything at all with this title, we need time for the attorney to get with the seller to clear it out. Maybe there's an outstanding lien the seller didn't know about. Now they have to pay at settlement. Maybe there's some kind of other glitch. If the attorney can't address it with the seller, then the attorney and the seller will go stand in front of the judge and ask the judge to do a suit to quiet title, an action to quiet title. So if the attorney discovers anything at all that prevents the seller from passing clear marketable title to the buyer, then they will work with the seller to clear that up. All this happens shortly after we go under contract. The attorney starts their big thorough search shortly after going under contract. Now fast forward to settlement. Buyer and seller come in and sign. When they leave, the attorney starts the closing process. And part of the closing process is for them to, they'll usually go back in and do one more quick search to make sure nothing hit the title from when they did the preliminary. And then based on their findings, the attorney offers their opinion of title to the title insurance company. And based on the attorney's opinion is whether or not or when title insurance will release the new policy. The attorney is also going to work with the lender and the title insurance company to get the seller to sign that affidavit. Basically, it just says, any of the liens on the property are the ones I'm paying off with my proceeds. I promise there are no other liens that could come on the property. For example, the mechanics lien. We've mentioned a couple of times that there are two types of closing states. The majority of the country is an escrow closing state, meaning they have title insurance companies handle the closing. Parties don't attend. They just drop their documents off. Escrow agent processes it. That's it. These states use something called the relation back doctrine to help us determine when the deed is delivered. So once the seller delivers the deed, the escrow agent, the escrow closing agent processes the deed. It relates back to when it was delivered. We don't see this much in North Carolina, and like I said, this is the majority of the company. Of the country is doing an escrow closing state. No attorneys, escrow agents. So what do we do in North Carolina? We use attorneys. We are a settlement meeting state, which means we do use settlement agents, also referred to as attorneys. The reason I think this is important, not so much for your test, but I think this is more important in real life. At some point in your career, you're going to work with a buyer moving here from another state. And they're familiar with the process in their state. And now we're trying to help them understand North Carolina. And at some point, those buyers may look at you and say, do I have to hire an attorney? And our answer is, If the property is located in the state of North Carolina, yes, you have to hire an attorney because we're a settlement meeting state. The seller has to report the sale to the IRS. Are they subject to taxes or not? I don't know. But they do need to report it. The closing attorney generally handles that on behalf of the seller. Not that we don't trust the seller to do it after closing, but just in case, the attorney will report that, send whatever it is they need down to the IRS. Your seller has questions about what are they going to tax me? What am I going to have to pay? Da 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 da. Have them make a phone call. Tell them to call their accountant. Buyer's agents, the year your buyer buys, especially a first-time home buyer, encourage them to talk to an accountant because they need to know accounting-wise for themselves how homeownership, purchasing, and homeownership, there may be things that they may be able to get tax deductions on. Remember to stay in your lane. So advise them to talk to an accountant. Questions? All right, switching gears just a bit. Is that a hand or are you good, Sabrina? Okay, just making sure. So switching gears just a little bit, we're going to go back and revisit TRID. Particularly, we got to spend some time talking about RESPA because remember, this is our unit, our closing unit, and RESPA handles the closing piece of it for the consumer. So as a refresher, we got this idea called TRID back in 2015. You don't necessarily need to know that date. But this is the result of the housing market crash, hopefully preventing us from being that bad off again. Understanding we will have dips in the market, but we do have procedures in place now to help protect us. TILA and RESPA have always been around. I mean, they've been around since like the 70s, so not always, but they've been around for a while. They are nothing new. What's new is TRID. TRID is integrating them. So prior to TRID, TILA had their set of documents that borrowers had to sign. RESPA had their set of documents that borrowers had to sign. And a lot of time for the consumer, for the borrower, it looked like they were signing the same thing twice because a lot of those documents were very similar. And one thing that Dodd-Frank decided was that this is confusing. How are we educating the consumer when they don't even understand what they're signing? So one thing Dodd-Frank did and TRID did was integrate the two. They combined the two. So if you look on page 528, just to give us an idea of where we are today, RESPA used to use the good faith estimate, GFE. TILA used the early truth in lending. TRID combined them. Today, we have one document called the loan estimate. Prior to TRID, RESPA used a HUD-1 settlement statement. TILA used a final truth in lending. Dodd-Frank combined them. And today, we have the closing disclosure. So the two primary forms from TRID that we see today at settlement is our loan estimate and our closing disclosure. So they consolidated that information. RESPA is our Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. RESPA is also referred to as Regulation X. I would know that RESPA is also referred to as Regulation X. Who remembers what we said TILA was also referred to? If RESPA's X,
Z?
TILA, Z, there it is, yep. So TILA is Regulation Z, RESPA is Regulation X. Yes, I would know both of those if I were you. RESPA helps the consumer determine the cost to close. When you see RESPA, see the word settlement. RESPA helps the consumer determine the cost to close. RESPA doesn't apply to all mortgage loans. RESPA only applies to mortgage loans for 1 to 4 dwellings, residential. RESPA is not around for a commercial loan. RESPA is not around if you want to buy a 5-plex. So it doesn't regulate all. There's something to look out for on your tests. Does RESPA regulate all loans? No. So as long as it's a residential loan, 1 to 4 units with one of our loans, conventional, FHA, VA, USDA, etc. RESPA's around. Otherwise, they're not around. They're not involved. One thing RESPA addresses with the consumer is the loan estimate. And RESPA has regulations when they have to send the loan estimate to the borrower. Their clock for when they have to do this and when they have to do that, the official clock starts when we have the loan application. And the loan application is defined as when the lender receives information on the borrower and information on the property. There's only so far in the loan process that we can go until we get your buyer under contract, until we have a ratified signed contract, i.e. property in our hand. That's when we officially have the loan application. And that's when the lender starts the approval process. We've gotten the pre-approval or the pre-qualification. This is what starts the approval process. So the loan application is what kicks things off for the lender. One requirement that RESPA puts on the lender. They say within 3 days of loan application, the lender is required to send the borrower a know before you owe booklet or information guide. If we're online, they may send us like a PDF through their software or whatever. This just walks the buyer through the home buying process, what they can expect, things to look forward to, services they should be encouraged to shop around. Also within 3 days of loan application, RESPA requires the lender to send the borrower a loan estimate. We're going to look at a sample loan estimate in just 1 second. So RESPA has these restrictions on the lender. Again, help educating the consumer, educating the borrower about this 30-year commitment that they're getting ready to make, or 15 or whatever. A lot of lenders today use like a software that it's kind of like your doctor's office. When your doctor wants to send you a message, if you're using one of these big brand doctors, they want to send you a message. They send you an email saying there's a new message for you in your account. So then you have to log into your account to see the message. They don't actually email you the message, but they send you an email saying log into your account, see the message. Lenders have a similar program. So they may email the borrower and say, your loan estimate is available. Log into your account and sign off acknowledging receipt. Your know before you owe booklet is available. Access your account to log in and acknowledge receipt. So software, it's a great way to communicate. And then the lender has, every time you log on, the lender has that date and time stamp. They get to play Big Brother on you. Everybody please note, this is a loan estimate. Can things change from an estimate? Absolutely. This is not final numbers. This is not the end all be all. Y'all, we're only 3 days after loan application. We just went under contract, didn't we? Not too terribly long ago. The loan application process has started. Now we're getting this loan estimate. So now the question comes in, what can change from the loan estimate to the final numbers? And again, RESPA puts limits on the lenders on how much can change. Some estimates, such as lender charges, are allowed 0 change. So in other words, what the lender quotes the borrower as their loan origination fee, for example, that is what it is. The lender can't change that after the loan estimate. Some things allow a 10% tolerance. These are things that the lender requires, but the borrower is not allowed to shop for. For example, the lender requires the appraisal. The borrower does not get to choose who does the appraisal. The appraisal is the property of the lender. The lender orders that. So there's a 10% tolerance for change on services that the lender requires that the borrower cannot shop for. And then there's an unlimited tolerance for services that the borrower can shop for. So for example, the home inspector. I have no idea what the home inspector is going to charge yet. We don't know until we order the home inspection. So those fees are out of the lender's control. Now they're going to guesstimate. They're going to do their best to predict. But if they don't get it right, they have wiggle room here. It's been my experience, lenders tend to overestimate a lot of figures on the loan estimate. Because let's face it, let's say you tell your buyer you're going to have closing costs, make a number up, $5,000. But then when we get to the final numbers, come to find out your buyer's closing costs are only $4,500. That's good news to the buyer, right? They just got themselves $500 less. They overestimated to give the buyer the big scenario. As it turns out, they don't know that much. The problem with RESPA is if the lender underestimates. So if they quote you 5 and your closing costs end up being like 7,000, RESPA says, now we got a problem. So the loan estimates, they're hard to get precise, but they need to give the borrower a good idea of what they're looking at. So let's all look, turn with me in your books to 535. And on 535, we can see a sample loan estimate. You see, we start with the applicant's information, property sales price. It's a 30-year conventional loan. There's our loan amount of $162,000. Can this amount increase after closing? Yes or no? There's our interest rate. There's our monthly principal and interest. Are there prepayment penalties? Yes or no? Is there a balloon payment? Yes or no? Come down just a little bit more. What's our estimated taxes and insurance? Borrower may not have even talked to a homeowner's insurance company at this point. So we're just kind of guesstimating, giving the buyer an idea of their estimated total monthly payment once this loan originates. Down a little bit more, we got estimated closing costs of $8,054. And then estimated cash to close is $16,054. This borrower knows within 3 days of loan application that when they're going to the closing attorney's office on settlement day, they need to bring an estimated cash to close of $16,054. I cannot stress how huge this is. I cannot stress how much TRID has changed the game. Guys, I remember prior to TRID, borrowers may not be seeing that number until the day or two before settlement. They may not be seeing their estimated monthly payment of $1,050 until they were sitting at the settlement table. Does that make you a little nervous? Does that make your eye twitch a little bit, your heart flutter a little bit? It was scary buying a house prior to TRID. And that's one big thing TRID and TILA or Dodd-Frank said is this mess has to stop. We've got to educate the consumers about the loan before they get it, not on the day that they're getting it. So the loan estimate and RESPA's requirement to deliver it within 3 days of the loan application is all designed to educate the consumer about the 30-year loan that they're getting ready to commit to. Game changer for the better. The rest of the loan estimate, page 536. Oh, RESPA's not done. Not only do they say your estimated cash to close is $16,054, page 536 says this is the breakdown of how we got to $16,054. So they don't just throw a number out there and say, okie doke, they break it down. This is where we got to this number. Questions on the loan estimate? Okay. Let's take
So
10. We'll
there's-
come back. Yeah, sorry.
It's okay, my bad. I was gonna say, so they get this about 3 days, or the lender is required to provide this to the buyer and the buyer's agent about 3 days after they go under contract,
Loan application.
which
Loan
can be
application, because
either
the other piece we're
before.
missing is the property, right? So once we have the contract, that's when the lender really starts their work. So that's
Got
that
it.
loan application is a 3, but when I say contract, because we don't have the pieces of the property until we have a contract. So this
Got it.
takes us back to buyer's agent, we go under contract, yay, send this thing to the lender. Loan application has started,
Okay, makes sense.
so they can
Thank you.
officially start. Yep, of course. Anything else on the loan estimate? Think about it. We'll answer after break. So let's take 10, last break. When we come back, we're going to look at our closing disclosure. So we're going to fast forward to closing. So let's take 10. Let's take attendance. I want to hit on a few things. Joy, you said something right before the break that I heard after we went on break. So I wanted to make sure that we were clear on something, and we will talk more about this in a second. But before break, you said this idea of loan application, the lender has 3 days to send this to the borrower and their agent or something along those lines. Understand when it comes to loan or anything, this communication is between the borrower and the lender. So when it comes to the loan process, this is one point of communication that you and I don't get involved. So the buyer's sensitive loan information isn't really my business. So I don't get involved in that piece of it. So the direct communication, and that does become very important just in 1 second, that we'll talk about. The other thing I wanted to mention, understand you guys, not all lenders were bad before TRID. Not all lenders made buyers wait to the last minute to get their numbers. Not all lenders are shady. But however, there were apparently enough going on that they had to put regulations on those out there. So I don't want to give the impression that lenders are bad people. Lenders' job is to loan us money. And yes, they're going to charge us to loan us money. These regulations just help better protect the consumer from all lenders, good and bad. This is a big deal. I had a tutor a couple weeks ago with a young lady, and we were talking about, the importance of understanding this 30-year commitment. And she was like, I can't wrap my brain around this. She said, I'm not even 30 years old yet. So you're wanting somebody to make a commitment, and I haven't even been for something I can't understand because I haven't been around that long. 30 years is a long time. And it's important. That's what we're doing now with TRID, is that it's important that they understand what that 30-year commitment is that we're making. Other questions or comments before we look at this next piece?
I'm munching on some goldfish, so sorry if I sound weird, but so with that clarification, thank you, by the way, is it just specifically for when they send out those documents? Like anything prior to that, the agent can be involved in those specifics?
From day one, when you say talk to your lender about getting pre-approved, the borrower's starting to throw numbers out there. We're not involved. We don't know. We're just not privy to those phone calls. And that's why we say talk to your lender. Now, the lender can call me and say, your buyer won't call me back. Your buyer won't email me, right? They can ask me to help keep them involved in the process.
Right.
But at the end of the day, pretty much all I know about the buyer's loan is what the lender provides on the pre-approval letter.
Okay.
I'm just not privy to that piece of it. Yep.
Got you. I guess I just assumed that we would be part of it because of like the accounting aspect in Old Car.
Now, well, we see numbers at the end to make sure
Right.
they're accurate, but I can only rely on the accuracy of the numbers provided to me.
Okay.
Looking for red flags, that kind of thing.
Got it. Thank you.
Of course. I thought I figured out that subtitle thing. Stop. Thank you. Okay, so I'm partly getting it. Now I got to figure out how to stop it forever. So at least I figured out how to stop it for the last hour. All right, so we talked about the loan estimate, one document, one RESPA document. The other RESPA document that we're going to talk about, let's fast forward to actual settlement. And now we have the closing disclosure. Post TRID, there are actually two closing disclosures. Pre-TRID, we put the seller's and the buyer's information all on the same document. TRID said, that's got to stop. We got to keep them separate. It is none of the seller's business what the buyer's numbers are. Remember, all the seller should care about is, can they get the loan? But it is none of the seller's numbers about the specific numbers. So now they have two closing disclosures, one for the seller. Let's understand this. When we talk about consumer protection, the consumer that we are protecting in this transaction is the buyer, because they are the ones originating a new loan. In this transaction, TRID doesn't care about the seller. So is everybody with me so far? In this transaction, the consumer that we are protecting is the borrower. The lender does not get involved in or prepare the seller CD. The lender and the seller have zero communication. The attorney will prepare the seller's closing CD. And when we talk about TRID rules and RESPA and TILA, none of that applies to the seller. So the attorney prepares the seller CD. They will see it a day or two, a couple days before settlement. So what does TRID care about? Our second closing disclosure is our borrower's closing disclosure. And now the regulations and the requirements come back in. TRID says that the lender has to send the borrower a completed closing disclosure. And then TRID specifically says that they must personally deliver the buyer their closing disclosure 3 days prior to settlement. You see that word must? Mark my words. You will have a closing delayed because of this rule. If the borrower doesn't see their CD 3 days before settlement, then we can't close on time. This is a lender law. You and I can't override this. The attorney can't override this. Now that 3 days is if personal delivery, so either the lender hands it to the borrower or they have the borrower sign off on that software. They're going to send you an email and say, there's a CD in your file. I need you to log in and sign off on it. If it's not personal delivery, let's say the lender wants to put it in the mail, snail mail. Now we have to allow for 6 business days before settlement. So in closing disclosure in TRID world, let's talk about days. In TRID world, Sundays do not count. National holidays do not count. In TRID world, we start counting days. Day 1 is the day after receipt. So if your buyer gets their CD today and they sign off on it today, day 1 will be Friday. Day 2 will be Saturday. Day 3 will be Monday. If your buyer gets their CD today, there is no possible way for them to close before Monday. So Sundays and holidays don't count. Christmas, 4th of July, for example, the big holidays. And we always start counting the day after receipt. And we cannot close until that CD has been in the borrower's hands for 3 days. This gives them the opportunity to review the numbers, compare it to their loan estimate. If they have any questions, this is the opportunity to ask. This is the time to ask.
So even if everything was okay before then, you cannot do it.
That's right. Must allow for 3 days. This is probably one of the biggest places that we can help keep those gears turning. You and I, as the agent, know that our buyer needs to be on the lookout for this. So like the week of closing, we need to have a conversation with our buyer. Be on the lookout for a very important email from the lender. Your response to this email will determine if we can close on time. If they get it Thursday, but they don't acknowledge it until Friday, Saturday is day 1, Monday is day 2. Now we can't close until Tuesday. You see how your closing just got delayed that quickly because the buyer didn't have time to sign it today and they didn't get signed till tomorrow. Help keep those gears moving. Have this conversation with your buyer so they can expect it. They can be on the lookout for it. Once this closing disclosure is delivered, there may still be some changes. This isn't the final. This is just the final. So, yes, ma'am.
The 6 business days is from when it is received, acknowledged, when
Correct.
it's through the mail. Okay.
That's right.
Not
Yep.
from
When
it's
it's
sent out.
acknowledged.
The
Yep.
mailbox rule,
Yep.
the mailbox rule doesn't apply.
That's right. And rest assured, you guys, I've never had to wait 6 days because lenders use that software now that we can communicate with, and it's just 3. Not saying it couldn't happen, but in my experience, I've never had to worry about the 6 days. We've just only had to focus on the 3 because our lenders are on top of it. They don't want it delayed either, right? Okay, so this is not the final CD. This is just the final. And this communication must go directly from the lender straight to the borrower. Like I said, you and I are not getting involved in this. So 3 days prior to settlement, the lender's sending this to the borrower. We're letting the borrower know that this is coming. If something changes from this CD from the lender and the final that we see at the attorney's office, there are changes allowed. So let me back up for a second. We're 3 days away from settlement. We're so close. We're getting there. We're 3 days away from settlement. The lender's issued their final CD. Now the lender sends that CD to the attorney. And the attorney is going to put their finishing touches on it. The lender and the attorney are in communication at this point, making sure all those numbers add up, all those numbers. I haven't seen this yet. This is just the CD from the lender to the borrower. Once the attorney puts their finishing touches on it and signs off on it, that's when they send it to the agent for us to review. If the attorney's made any changes, it'll show up on their CD. If you and I find a mistake, then we may have a change to the CD. This is the lender's final CD, but this isn't the final. The final, we're going to see at settlement. If there are changes to the final CD, the lender is required to issue a new closing disclosure. The borrower always needs to be informed about their current accurate numbers. So lender sends it to borrower within 3 days. Lender sends it to attorney. Attorney makes a change. We got to notify the buyer. I'm sorry, the lender. Attorney sends it to us. We review it. We find an error. There's a change. The lender has to notify the borrower. Not all, let me rephrase. All changes require a new CD. Not many changes are going to require a new 3-day count. Any change requires a new CD. But there's a small amount of changes that, in addition to a new CD, will also require a new 3-day count. If after the lender's final CD is issued, the APR annual percentage rate increases, if there's an addition of the prepayment penalty, or if the basic loan product changes. What I mean by that, 3 days prior to settlement, buyer switches from conventional to FHA. These changes will require new CD. All changes require new CD. These are the only 3 changes that require a new 3-day count. Another reason why settlement might be delayed. We're going to talk about, we're heading to our responsibility with these closing disclosures. Again, I'm reviewing it for accuracy. The people that prepare these things are human. Humans make mistakes. So the thinking is the more sets of eyes we have on these things, the better chance for accuracy. So if I'm reviewing it and I find a mistake, I'm going to report it. They're going to make the change. Closing still goes on. If the attorney adds something or changes something, issue a new CD, closing goes on. Any one of these happen, issue a new CD and give us a new 3-day count. So we looked at our sample loan estimate on 535. So now look with me, if you will, on page 540. And on page 540, we have our sample closing disclosure from this same borrower that we had the loan estimate on 535. So we literally could flip back and forth and do a side-by-side comparison. On the closing disclosure on 540, there's our borrower's information again, information about the loan. There's your loan amount, interest rate, monthly principal and interest. All that stayed the same from the loan estimate. It looks like our estimated total monthly payment went up 26 cents. That's probably because we calculated taxes or now we have insurance, right? 26 cents a month isn't anything for anybody to get excited about. So we have our final estimated total loan payment. There's closing costs of $9,712. And then check out that cash to close. At the loan estimate, we told the borrower, you're going to have to bring $16,054. Now fast forward to closing, and how much are they bringing? $14,147.26. Isn't that good news to your buyer? They thought they were bringing 16, but guess what? Now they only got to bring $14,000. So that gave them a couple $1,000 so they can like go to Home Depot and get paint stuff, right? It put a little bit of extra money in their pocket. Again, when those final numbers come down, not an issue. If those final numbers go up, now we got a problem. And that's why the lender tends to overestimate some of those estimates. We're preparing the buyer for the worst, but now we hear and we can see those actual numbers. The breakdown of that 14,142 is in the rest of the closing disclosure of 541 and 542. I'll let you guys look at that. You can see on 541, you see the borrower paid expenses. There's also a couple seller paid expenses helping us determine everybody's debits and credits. Over on 542, we hash out those final numbers. At the bottom of 542 on the left-hand column, you can see that $14,147.26. So there's the breakdown of how they got to that. Also, the right-hand column there, the seller's figures. In the real world, you're not going to see these on the same closing disclosure, thanks to TRID. So in the real world, we're going to be looking at two closing disclosures, one for the buyer, one for the seller. Maybe for saving the tree, they just put them together in our book for us. But in the real world, they're going to be separate. On page 542 at the top, I think this is the most valuable piece to the borrower. They may not have that loan estimate at their fingertips, but look at what it does. It reminds us if our loan estimate numbers, compare it to the final numbers, and then answers the question, did this change? So you as the borrower, you can review this pretty quickly and see if there are any changes, and if so, why? Again, what this rule does is it gives the borrower the opportunity to review this, to make sure they don't have any questions, to make sure they're good with this. Instead of sitting down at the settlement table, seeing this for the first time and being told, we got a busy schedule today, so we just need you to go ahead and sign here. Much better for borrowers today. Can we agree? We're doing a much better job of educating the consumer on that 30-year commitment. Thank you, TRID. When you guys come to post licensing, 541 and 542 are what you'll be doing. When I say we'll do a full-blown closing disclosure and post licensing, 541 and 542. See what you have to look forward to? Questions?
I do.
Mhm.
one of the big things that you said when we first started the class is we're not allowed to talk to people in jargon. And I know that we see a lot of acronyms, abbreviations, and so on and so forth throughout the book. And some of them are put in brackets and some are not. And I know that when I take my notes and we're looking through the book, I put them in brackets and highlight them. Are there certain ones, like I know like RESPA and TILA and so on and so forth, we're supposed to know? Are we going to be tested on the so-called jargon, and are we supposed to remember all of them? Because I know as we progress, we're learning the jargon, but are we supposed to remember all of this jargon, or are we supposed to keep it out of our heads and know the correct terminology?
I would venture to say that your test is probably gonna, spell out, I mean, they may not say TILA or, Truth in Lending Act. So some of them you may get TILA versus it spelled out, the more commonly used ones. But I
Okay.
would say for the most part, your test is gonna be pretty clear. Remember, these test questions have been vetted by previous test takers. So if
Okay.
everybody gets this question wrong, they may say, well, maybe it's because they didn't know what TILA is, so we need to spell it out. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
And that's that the test process. If 100% of you get it wrong, it's a problem with the question. And that's what they're going to come back and revisit. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
could you see acronyms in your test? I'm sure you could, but I think they'd be the more popular ones that we're more familiar with.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, let's bring this home. What's this closing disclosure mean for us? Where are we heading? Well, we as the brokers, we have a duty, we are held responsible for verifying the accuracy of the information in the closing disclosure of those figures that we should reasonably know. I can't verify all of the figures. There's another test question answer to look out for. Am I responsible for all of the figures on the closing disclosure? No, only the ones that I should reasonably know. So what are figures on the closing disclosure that I should reasonably know? Well, for example, should I know the agreed upon purchase price? Should I know the agreed upon due diligence fee, earnest money deposit, seller pay closing costs? Is there going to be a home warranty? Where do we get all that information? How in the world do I know that? It's what put us under contract, isn't it? Don't we have a ratified contract in our transactional documents? So the first thing we do when we receive these CDs to review, go pull out the contract. Did you have any amendments to amend the purchase price or amend any of the figures? Those are numbers that we can verify. We can also verify certain expenses of buyer and seller, those that we're getting ready to talk about and go through. By the time I'm done with you guys, I'll have you being able to verify prorated taxes, interim interest, all sorts of fun math that we're getting ready to learn. What are some numbers that I can't verify? Well, for example, like we previously said, I'm not privy to the conversation between lender and borrower. So when the lender says, I'm going to charge you a 2% loan origination fee, I wasn't privy to that conversation. However, I should be able to look at that loan origination fee and make sure that it looks reasonable. If this is a 12% loan origination fee, my little red flag should go up and ask some questions. So I can't review it for accuracy. I should have an idea, a basic idea of what that looks. When you find a mistake on these closing disclosures, words mean everything, not if, when you find a mistake on these closing disclosures, we owe it to our clients to contact the attorney and contact the lender and get those corrected. Remember that A in OCAR? A in OCAR is accounting for their funds. And here, the very last funds is how much does the buyer have to bring to closing And how much does the seller hopefully gonna get from closing? So when the attorney or the paralegal sends you the closing disclosure, that's when we need to sit down with our document, our transactional file, pull out those documents, sit down with your calculator. I mean, nothing else. Go back to page 541. If you were just to take that borrower paid at closing column and just straight line add all the way to the bottom, you should get $9,682.30. So even though I may not be able to verify all those numbers in between, can I pick up my calculator and make sure it adds up? So we're going to help them review it for accuracy. Listing agents. One thing you will see on the seller CD that you're not going to see on the buyer CD, what's something that the seller pays that is very important to me and you. My money. Y'all going to check your commission for accuracy? You better believe it. I was the listing agent once. I received my seller CD. And you know what line wasn't complete? My commission. And the buyer's agent's commission. His name was Mike. I called our paralegal and I said, Mike and I would like to get paid. And the paralegal said, and I quote, whoopsie. 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 Guys, what would have happened if I didn't catch that? I don't know. I don't know. I'd like to think my seller was a very sweet lady. So I'd like to think afterwards she'd be more than happy to sit down and willing to write us a check. What if she doesn't? Oh, now we got to think about taking her to court and da 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 da. Much better to catch these mistakes up front than try to deal with them after settlement. With that being said, buyer's agents, you don't see the seller CD usually. So you're not going to see your commission. Buyer's agents, I think it's worth a phone call to either the listing agent or the paralegal and say, I just want to make sure my commission's accurate. I just want to make sure my commission's right. I think it's worth the phone call. What do y'all think? Because you don't see that number because that's a seller expense. Everybody see what I'm saying? So listing agents, you'll see your seller CD. Buyer's agents, you're only going to see your buyer CD. So our number, and like seriously, you guys, we're going to make sure our money's right. Yes? Old car said, oh, look at y'all head. Darn right, Julie, I'm going to make sure my money's right. You better believe it. I hear you. Guess what old car says? I owe that same duty to make sure my buyers and sellers' money is right, just as much as I make sure mine is right. Everybody with me? License, law, and commission law. So we're going to talk more about this CD. This is where we're heading. We'll get to next week. In the meantime, I got just a few more things to say about RESPA. So we fast forward in your book, we're picking back up on page 551. And a few other things that RESPA does to protect the consumer. They have regulations on controlled business arrangements. An example of a controlled business arrangement, this idea of one-stop shopping is gaining in popularity. So in other words, you might be able to find a real estate firm, a closing attorney, and a lender all under the same roof. We're all sharing office space. And the controlled business arrangement says if you go to the firm, the real estate firm, the firm may suggest you use that closing and lender. Does the buyer have to use that closing and lender that shares an office space with you? No, but we can put them on our preferred vendor list, absolutely. The controlled business arrangement says if anybody makes money off of anybody, like sharing rent, for example, we just have to disclose that business arrangement. So the firm would say, if you use this attorney, if you use this lender, this is our business arrangement, disclosing those terms to the lender. Your firm will have a form, if this is the case, to have your buyer sign off on it. RESPA also put restrictions on the lender's yield spread premiums. So remember we said the yield spread premium, the lender's yield is their rate of return. The higher the rate of return, the more attractive the product is when the lender's going to sell it. So once upon a time ago, prior to TRID, there was a fee for this yield spread premium. And some lenders were having the buyer pay for that as part of their closing costs. Remember, buyers were just signing stuff and not knowing what the heck it was they were signing. They didn't know what they were agreeing to. So buyers are signing, yeah, I'll pay that yield spread premium. RESPA put an end to that. Now they say if the lender does charge for that yield spread premium, they need to offer the borrower a credit for that at settlement. That should not be a borrower fee to benefit the lender. So now there's a borrower credit if that fee is charged. RESPA has put restrictions on the borrower's escrow account. The lender will create an escrow account for the borrower. So every month they send their payment in, 1/12 of those taxes and 1/12 of that homeowner's insurance hangs out in an escrow account. When those bills come due, the lender has that money to pay those bills on behalf of the borrower. RESPA put restrictions on that. RESPA only allows the lender to charge 1/12 of this year's taxes. They only allow the lender to charge 1/12 of this year's insurance. They cannot charge more than 1/12 of the annual taxes and insurance. Do taxes and insurance go up sometimes? Yeah, especially insurance, it likes to do that, right? So next year, that 12th might be bigger. Your mortgage payment might go up next year. Understand it's not because of your principal and interest. It's because your taxes and insurance went up. So if that amount goes up, they can charge more, but still not more than 1/12 of this year's taxes and insurance. The other escrow account restriction is how much the lender is going to collect at closing to originate and fund the borrower's escrow account. So there's going to be some fees that we'll see on Tuesday, and those fees are restricted on based on how much the lender can charge the borrower at settlement. Another requirement from RESPA for the lenders is a loan servicing disclosure requirement. If your lender intends to service the loan after it's originated, RESPA says the lender needs to notify the borrower. So you know before you take on this loan, whether or not your loan can or cannot be serviced. The second piece to this disclosure, once it's been originated, if the lender sells the loan, RESPA requires the new lender to notify the borrower and the former lender to notify the borrower. So if your loan gets serviced, you should receive notice from both old lender and new lender, notifying you that your loan has been serviced. This last one hit close to home. This one hurts. Let's back up again and go pre-TRID. Pre-TRID, settlement service providers could give each other referral fees and kickbacks for recommending that you use my services. Pre-TRID, it used to be if I recommended my buyer to a lender, I might get a gift card, or I might get my name put in a drawing. Post-TRID. TRID now says settlement service providers cannot give or receive a kickback or referral fee for recommending services. Real estate agents are settlement service providers. Closing attorney, lender, home inspector, pest inspector, surveyor, All us people that provide a service for settlement fall under this category. And so today, when I recommend my buyer to a lender, all that lender can say is, thank you. Let's think about this. Remember, this is all about consumer protection. Let's say this lender has a policy. I'm going to give you a $25 Amazon gift card for every buyer you send to me. Why am I sending my buyer to this lender? I want to go to Amazon. I want my gift card. I'm going to send them all to this lender. I may even send something like, you've got to use this lender because I want my gift card. Is that what's in the best interest of the borrower? No, which is why they squashed it. Y'all want to see some examples of the way life used to be? Pre-TRID, for example, home inspector pays a real estate broker a $25 referral fee for each buyer the broker refers to the home inspector. That's a revolving door. I get a buyer, I'm sending that home inspector. I get a buyer, I'm sending that home inspector. Again, today the recommendation is give them several different names for them to choose. And I cannot give or receive. So if the home inspector offers me $25, I can't accept it. Do we hear that? Settlement service providers can't give or receive. All right, here's the other one. You ready? This is the one that hurt. For each borrower referred by a real estate broker, a mortgage loan officer places a number drawing ticket into a box and gives the broker a stub. At a pre-designated point in time, a ticket is drawn and the broker with the winning ticket receives an all expenses paid cruise. Again, I got to ask, why am I sending my buyer to this lender? Because I want to go on a cruise. Is this what best for my buyer? No, which is why this is no more. Lenders, home inspectors, all those guys are around. They want to meet us because we're the ones working with the buyers and we're the ones that can refer them and recommend them. So you're going to meet people, functions at your local board of realtors for example. We have lenders, home inspectors, people stop by the office all the time. And they may come in the office with a box of donuts and a stack of business cards. By the way, I hope y'all like donuts. You're in the right industry if you like donuts. Everybody brings us donuts. Bring me a bagel one day or something, but we get lots of donuts. So lender comes into the office with a box of donuts and a stack of business cards and says, I'm going to put these back here on the kitchen table. Have a donut, take a card, call me if I can answer any questions. RESPA allows that. RESPA doesn't have a problem with that. What RESPA doesn't allow is that lender to come in with a box of donuts and say, this is for you, you, and you, because you sent me business. If anybody else wants a donut, you better send me business. Do we see the difference? If they want to bring all of us food, that's cool. They can't reward the individual. No fun, huh? But again, it's about what's best for the consumer. And me thinking about my free cruise or my $25 may not be what's best for the consumer. RESPA says, yes, they do. RESPA says I can't receive $1. I can't receive a donut in exchange for referring somebody to that lender or home inspector, etc. Yes, ma'am.
So I've heard of like a situation where one of the new construction developments, the people, I guess the builder has a connection with a lender and the lender was there during some of the open houses. And they were offering, if you are to use this as your lender, we'll start with a 4.5% interest rate. And I'm assuming that doesn't apply here because it's about the lender and the borrower, not the lender and the agent, right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. This is to and from settlement service providers. So this doesn't regulate if I want to get my buyers a closing gift or my sellers a closing gift, right? If they want to give me a closing gift, this is only to and from settlement service providers. So I think another good question, common question I get is, well, what about the builder? The builder may offer a buyer bonus. If I bring an acceptable contract to this builder by the end of August, I'm going to get a $500 bonus. The question is, can I accept that? The builder is not a settlement service provider. The builder is the seller. They are a party to the contract. Does that make sense? So that's where we need to be careful. It's somebody that provides a service for the settlement process. And RESPA says we can't give or receive a referral fee or a kickback for recommending settlement service providers. So gee, Julie, what's the big deal? I violate RESPA. Who cares? How's that $25 Amazon gift card looking now? Tim says, you bet a lot of people were mad at RESPA. Oh, you better believe it. Agents, yeah, we didn't like this. We're over it now. But back in 2015, yeah, we were not happy. Because were we even doing Amazon back in 2015? Let's say our Target gift card back in 2015. I can't remember exactly when we started using Amazon for every single thing that we buy. What did we do before it, right? Thank you, Amazon. Violations of RESPA, yes, a lender rule, but we do have involvement in this. Looking at $10,000, up to $10,000 per violation. You may get to wear orange for a year. An injunction is a legal stop. So if the court or the commission puts an injunction on you, you cannot practice real estate while they're investigating this. It's a legal stop. You may have to compensate the victims if you harm them monetarily. And then you could also be facing treble damages plus court costs for parties. What does treble damages mean? You take the damages awarded to the injured party and you times it by 3. Is RESPA a big deal? I hope this slide kind of answers that. Yes. Again, is that $25 Amazon gift card worth it? I don't think so. Questions on RESPA? I tell you guys, Tim, to your point, it wasn't just RESPA. In 2015, our worlds changed. TRID took our world, gave it a little shake, and put it upside down. Real estate, it was a game changer. Again, we're coming off the housing market crash. And we didn't really realize what went wrong at the time, but we knew something went right and we needed to fix it and we needed to prevent this again. 2015 was a rough time in real estate. Because not only were we mad about this RESPA thing, we were mad about the whole TRID change, everything in general. It's what, 2023 now? So TRID's getting ready to turn 8 years old. We're totally over it. It's all good. It's a thing of the past. If you talk to an agent that doesn't teach this stuff, they may not even remember. It's just fresh in our minds. You know what I'm saying? So 2015 wasn't a great year, but in hindsight, TRID did so good for the consumer. That's what it's about. That's what it's always should have been about. We lost track of our focus, and now TRID, RESPA, TILA say, yeah, no, we're not going to go back there. We're not going to do this again. Questions? Okay, so we're not going just yet, bear with me. But when we come together Tuesday, the rest that we have to do in Unit 21 is our math. So we're going to start Tuesday morning with some math, bring your calculators. The first thing I want to show you, there's several places in your book that reference the math that we're getting ready to do. So I do encourage you to look ahead, page 553. You can look ahead at the preparation of the settlement statement. There's the math concepts at the end of unit 21 that go over this settlement statement. We're going to talk about prorations as well. Let's go back in time. Y'all remember way back to unit 3. And in unit 3, we taught you how to calculate annual taxes. We looked at the tax assessed value and the tax rate, and we calculated how much taxes were for this year. Now, fast forward to unit 21. We're going to prorate those annual taxes. So we're going to talk about proration. We're going to talk about how proration makes it fair between the buyer and the seller. What I mean by that, let's say you are buying my house today. Today is August 10th. Is it fair for either one of us to pay the full year's taxes, 2023 taxes? No, it's not. So how are we going to make it fair? We're going to prorate it. We're going to share that expense. So there's some scenarios for you guys back in unit 3 on page 61. And then the math facts section in the back of your book 795. So again, this is your reference for the conversation we're going to have first thing Tuesday morning. In preparing ourselves for Tuesday morning, I want you guys to look with me now, page 561 and 562. Let's call 561 to 562 your formula for doing these settlement statements. So let's look first on 562. And it gives us a breakdown of things that are typically debits to the seller, things that are typically debits to the buyer, and things that are typically credits to the buyer. Knowing what's a debit or a credit to whom is a huge part in calculating these settlement statements. So this gives us, and we'll talk about these, we're going to break each of these down and talk about them. Remember at the beginning of this unit, I said you're going to have to calculate how much your buyer has to bring to closing, and we don't have to worry about the seller. So why do I care about seller debits on 562? We've got to identify the distractors. Do you think, for example, they could put excise tax in the problem? Who pays excise tax? Seller. So if we're calculating how much the buyer has to bring to closing, excise tax is our distractor. So why do we care about the debit to the seller? Because those are our distractors when we are calculating how much does the buyer have to bring to closing. Back on 561, we look at the items that we can prorate. This year's taxes, HOA dues if applicable, rent if applicable. Not only are we going to discuss those items to be prorated, but we also have to determine one party's going to get a debit, another party's going to get a credit. We're going to have to ask ourselves who owes who. So we'll spend some time when we prorate on Tuesday, looking at those debit the one party, credit the other, and how we can determine that. And then at the bottom there, you have double entry items. Double entry item meaning it's going to show up how many times on the CD? It's going to show up twice. The seller and the buyer are going to see it. So there at the tippy top is your sales price. The buyer's promising to pay the seller in exchange for the property. At closing disclosure, that's going to shake out as a debit to the buyer, credit to the seller, because that's what the buyer owes the seller. The other thing to really pay attention there is due diligence. At settlement, we're going to debit the seller, credit the buyer. Remember, the buyer paid this to the seller when we went under contract. So now that we're at closing, we have to reverse those charges. And that's what we're doing with the debit, the seller, credit the buyer. So I point this out to you guys in the hopes, please spend some time with 561 and 562 this weekend, because this is the math we're going to do first thing Tuesday morning. And I guarantee you, if you spend time with 561 and 562 this weekend, Tuesday's math will be a lot easier. Because now we have an idea of things that are typically debits to one party, credits to the other. What questions do I have? Once we get through our settlement statement math on Tuesday, we keep going. Up next, we do unit 17. 17, we get to put on our appraiser's hat. So we get to look through the eyes of the appraiser. So please look ahead, rest of 21, 17. What questions do I have? Comments? We good? Okay.
I know you offer tutoring. What, I'm assuming I just need to reach out to you directly for what schedule looks like for that. Okay.
Absolutely. Yep. Interested in tutoring myself. Jane offers tutoring. Aaron offers tutoring. Joy, to your point, we're about 3 weeks away. We are 3 weeks away. So if you were thinking about tutoring, this would be the time to reach out to myself, Jane, or Aaron. Understand they're all an option. Let me go back in here real quick. What we ask with the tutoring, you guys, please don't wait till the last minute. I know I'm a busy person. I know Jane's a busy person, and I know Aaron's a busy person. So if you email us the day before the test and say, I need tutoring before my test tomorrow, I can't guarantee that we'll be available. So if you're thinking about tutoring, if you're thinking about getting us on the books, this is the welcome in the welcome section. And you can see there's Jane's contact information, Aaron's and myself's. Just give us time to get you on the books. We're busy people. We're all busy people, aren't we? Are you guys busy people? Yeah. Welcome to life. You know? Thank you for that, Joy. Anything else? All right, y'all have a great weekend. Please never hesitate to me if I can reach out, if I can help in any way. Otherwise, we'll see you guys first thing Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. sharp with calculus.